Nowadays, when developers talk about full stack applications, they often refer to JavaScript as being the front end and the back end framework of many modern day applications. But what I'm going to cover today in this video is Django, which is essentially a back end framework that encourages rapid development. And it's something that's very powerful out of the box. It comes with a lot of bells and whistles. This course specifically will cover the fundamentals of Django, and in future courses, we can delve a bit deeper into the more advanced topics and concepts in this framework. So today, we're going to be building a basic to-do app using Django. Without further ado, let's get to the show. Okay, so before we start looking into the app, I just want to cover some very high-level points about Django. So right now, I'm on Django's website, which is djangoproject.com, and essentially it just has a high-level overview of what Django actually is. So it says here that Django is a Python-based web development framework, and essentially it's ridiculously fast, which means it allows you to quickly spin up new projects and applications, and from there, it comes complete with things such as a back-end admin panel, where admins can control records, can manage user records, groups, and other permissions, as well as allowing us to create brand new database tables from which we can set additional permissions, as well as adding new fields, removing new fields on the fly. So it's a very powerful framework in a sense also that it allows us to quickly build also a UI component to it. So we can also have our backend, but we can also have a front end. So essentially it is full stack. However, Django is more commonly used in a lot of backend frameworks, especially in the case of using Django DRF, which is the REST framework that can be installed with Django through a package. So definitely Django is one of my favorites because it allows me to quickly get up and running in a project without the need of having to over configure things, especially dealing with YAML files or other types of like configuration files. So what we're going to be building today is this to-do app here. And as you can see, it's very, very basic. And I wanted to keep this basic so that it's easy to understand exactly what we're going to be building. So right here, I just have a button that says add new task. So if I click on that button, it's going to take us to this Django form. Now this form under the hood is essentially a class. And if you guys know, if you're new to development, for those who are new, rather, a class is basically a blueprint of an object. So if you think of a class could be something like an animal, and an animal has state and behavior. And essentially a Django form also has state and behavior. And we define the states and behaviors through a series of field names, as well as the attributes, whether it's a text field or a text area field, character field, number field, Boolean field, and so on. So this form right here takes in a title and a description, and it also allows the user to tick a box here whether a task is completed or not. So let's just see here. Let's test this out. If I were to add a title, let's just say buy bananas, and I'll just say pick up bananas after work. And let's go ahead and check this box, task completed. So if I check this box and I click add task, it'll automatically redirect me back to the home page. And as you guys can see, I have this new task waiting here for me right now. So now I can click on this task and I can see that this task has already been completed because if you recall, I've already checked that box, and then it gives me details such as the title and description that we've entered. So this is working exactly as we expect, and we're going to be building this today. Also, just to kind of delve a little bit deeper into some of the CRUD operations, we're also able to update this record. So for example, let's say I don't want bananas, I just want apples. So I'll change that to buy apples, and I'll just say here, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And let's just say, for instance, that this task is not complete. So I'll uncheck that, and I'll click update. And as you can see here, this updated, and in fact, it redirected us directly back to the detail record instead of the home page. So it says right here, buy apples, and then we have the new description, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So now I can go back to the home page, and finally, if I wanted to delete this record, I just click this delete button right here, It's going to confirm my choice to delete. And let's just say if I click cancel, let's see what happens. It redirects me back to this homepage view. But if I click delete again, and this time I click yes, delete, now you guys can see that that record is gone. So very simple CRUD operations. CRUD being create, read, update, and delete. Very simple, but we're going to be building this app today, and it's going to show you the inner workings of Django so that in a very easy to understand form, you'll be able to start building your own more complex applications through this video. So let's go ahead and get started with Visual Studio Code. All right, so as you guys see here, I have Visual Studio Code opened, and I basically have an empty directory right now. This is where we're going to start our Django project. But before we get to that, I definitely want to let you guys know that you should have Python 3 installed on your computer. So basically, if you go to the Python official website here at python.org, you'll be able to download and install the current version of Python. At the current time of this recording, it's version 3. So any version of 3, it could be 3.1, 3.2, and so on. Doesn't matter what the build number is, you just want to make sure you have version 3 installed. In the future, if there happens to be version 4 out there, just make sure you follow the instructions for version 4 for the installation and configuration of that version. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code here. And basically what I want to do is I want to start by setting up my current project. So let's go back here. All right, so right now I have a terminal open. Let me just clear this out so you guys can see this nice and clearly. We're going to be running a couple of commands, and this is very common in the Python world. Essentially, when working with Django, you'll have to become somewhat of a master with running commands. However, once you get the hang of it, it's very simple for you to follow along in the future. So the very first thing I'll mention is once you have Python installed, you first want to make sure that it definitely is installed and configured on your local machine. Now, I'm on a Mac right now. Windows commands could be slightly different, so you just need to do a quick Google search to see what those Windows commands are. But I'll try to point them out wherever I can. For the most part, most of the commands will be the same. So first I'm going to check my current version of Python. I'm going to type here in the prompt Python 3 like that, -v, and hit enter. So we see a bunch of messages being outputted. There may be a slight problem with my current version of Python, but it says right here that I'm on Python 3.13.0. So it's the second to last line right here. So it is in fact working, and I actually tested this out. I'm just going to quit this by typing quit in opening closing parentheses, and I'm just going to clear my terminal again. So I do have Python installed. I think there may be an issue with some of the configurations, but that's not going to impact this tutorial at all. So yeah, now that we've confirmed that we have Python installed, the next thing that we want to do is we want to install Django globally on our machine. So now I already have Django installed globally, but essentially the command you want to run here is pip install Django. Now, pip is a command that comes packaged with the Python library. So once you get Python installed on your machine, that'll give you access to pip. So you could run this install command. I'm just going to run it to see what happens. I already have this installed on my local machine. So I hit enter. And as you guys can see here, it says requirement already pretty much met. That means that I already have Python installed and I already have Django installed globally on my machine, so therefore it won't reinstall it. So let me just clear this terminal here. So after we've done that, for you it may take a bit of time, so just kind of be patient as it installs on your machine. It'll get set up right away as soon as it's done. Now the very third thing that we're going to do here is we're basically going to start setting up our project. So I'm currently in the folder where I want this project to be. So I'm going to create a brand new Django project here. Now there's a command called Django Admin that will allow us as admins of this project to create projects and to do admin level edits and so on. So let me type in here Django-admin, and there's a command called start project. So I'm going to type that all in one word. Let's call this Django_crash. So we know exactly what this belongs to here. So this is our project, okay? Now each project will have a set of apps. For this particular tutorial, we're only going to create one app, and that's going to be the to-do_list app. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. And upon doing that, it set up my project. As you can see here in the left sidebar, I have a new Django_crash folder. So if I were to expand that folder, let's see, if I expand that, you're going to see here that there are several files and folders that have been added as part of this project. Now, I'm going to go through these very high level. It's not important for us to cover all of these in this tutorial, but I'll give you very high levels of each. So the first one here is this _init _.py. Now, anything ending in a .py file extension is essentially a Python file. That's why it's called .py. Now, you'll notice that this file is empty. That's because this is an initialization file that's usually a part of every single folder within your application, whether it be an app folder or here in this root directory. And this init file must be present in order for Django to know that this is part of a model or part of an application, the component of the application. And without this init file, then whenever you run migrations, Django won't know that it needs to look at this particular file to determine what kinds of migrations to run. If that doesn't make any sense to you, we're going to get into migrations shortly, and you guys will hopefully understand a bit better how this ties into the init.py file. So now, as you can see below, we also have other files here. This ASGI file is just part of the initialization of the application. So when this application runs, this file gets called and some inner workings happen based on this file. One of the most important files we're going to be working with is this settings.py file. Now, this file is very important because it's here where we'll set a lot of our project configurations as well as app level configurations as well. Specifically, we're going to be working with the installed apps array where we would specify the name of our app as we create it. We'll get to that shortly. Then we have this WSGI file, which deals with web services. And again, is part of the configuration for the Django project. It actually looks at this file to determine how it should run this project and render it. And then within this urls.py file, this is our project level urls.py. Now, whenever you see a urls.py file, just think of this as being part of your app routing. So any kind of URL routing that you're going to set up in your app to point to specific pages or specific endpoints if you're working with the REST framework in Django. This is where you're going to set up those endpoints so that users can navigate to them or so that the API can point to them. So that's exactly what we're going to be working on shortly. Last but not least, we have this manage.py file. Now, this manage.py file is very important because many of the Python level commands that we'll be running will be looking at this file to determine what kind of commands to execute. And there are several commands that are predefined here in this manage.py file. We don't need to be concerned with making edits here because this is prepackaged with Django. And so thankfully we don't have to. You are able to add certain things if you wanted to. However, it's not recommended. I definitely recommend not toying with this and just kind of leaving this as is. So that's pretty much what we're going to be working with in this project here. So let's see, what's the next thing that we want to do here? So we've already set up our Django project using the Django-admin start project command. What we want to do is we want to CD or change directory into this new folder that we've created. So first, if I typed in ls here, it's going to give me basically the new project folder that you see here, which is Django_crash. What I want to do is I want to point my terminal to this file. So I'm just going to say here cd Django_crash and hit enter. And now if I ls, you'll see that I'm within this directory because I can see once again Django_crash and manage.py. I want to point out here that the reason why these files are named the same is by default when you run the Django-admin start project and then you enter the project name, basically the top level or root folder is named exactly the same as the inner app, the inner default app that gets created. That's why these are both named Django Crash. But later we're going to be creating a brand new app called To-Do List, where we're basically going to be housing most of our logic anyway. So we won't be making too many edits in this inner Django crash folder anyway. Okay, so we've CD'd into this folder so we can get access. Now, the reason why I wanted to change directory here, change the current directory, is we need to now set up our virtual environment. So to run Python commands in a localized scope, we need to create a virtual environment because we don't necessarily want to run all of our commands in a global context on our computers. We want them to be specific to this project, so if we share this project with other developers, they'll be able to run the same commands no matter what version we're using. So let's go ahead and clear this console. The next command I'm going to run here in this folder, guys, make sure you're in this, this Django crash folder, the top level one. I'm going to run the command Python 3-m venv and then vm. Vm stands for virtual environment. So if I hit enter, give that a second to run. Cool, so that ran. Now if you look here on the side, we have now this VM folder. If I expand this VM folder, we don't really have to be concerned much with this, but if I expand this and then I expand this bin or binary folder, within here we have this activate file. If I open this up, this looks like gibberish to you, but basically this is a magical file because it allows us to run or start our virtual environment so that we can run localized commands on this project using the Django and the Python command set. So let me just go ahead and close that because we don't need to make any edits there. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate this, this virtual environment. Now again, I'm on a Mac, so the Mac command is very different from Windows. I believe on the Windows, to activate your virtual environment, you would type something like venv /scripts / activate, I believe, something like that. But since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to type source space venv /bin /activate. And if I hit enter, now you guys will see here on the far left of this command line right here, we are within the virtual environment because it prefixes this line with parentheses venv. So now we're basically pointing to the virtual environment. That means that any Django or Python level commands will now apply specifically to this project's virtual environment. Thus, there's no need to run any commands in a global context. All right, so that's exactly what we want to do. We want to make sure we always activate this virtual environment when working with Python projects, Python Django projects to be specific. All right, so now we've already activated this. The next thing we want to do here is we basically want to now work with installing the various packages that we need to have. So if you guys recall, we've already installed Django on a global context, in a global context. What we need to do now is install Django once again, but this time specifically for this virtual environment. Since we've already activated it, we need to be able to install Django so it knows exactly how to run this project. So once again, let's type in here pip install Django and hit enter. And that's now going to install Django within this virtual environment. So let's give that a few moments. All right, so that's finished installing. That's awesome, so good. So now we've got Django set up. Now, one thing that I typically like to do, and you don't have to do this, let me just clear my console here. You don't have to do this, but one thing I typically like to do, especially when deploying a Django project, is I like to freeze all of my packages, my package installations into a requirements.txt file. In fact, this is required if you wanted to deploy this project to, let's say, Heroku or to DigitalOcean or Railway or some other service. You need to be able to freeze this into a text file so that that server, that remote server, can then look at those file installations and then install the corresponding packages. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The next command I'm going to type here is pip freeze greater than sign requirements.txt. And what this is going to do is going to take all of the currently installed packages and add a reference to each package within this requirements.txt file. So we're basically going to be creating a brand new requirements.txt. So let me hit enter. And now if I were to do a command P to open up requirements.txt right here, you guys will see right now we have these installed packages. So we have some of these package names could be a bit cryptic, but we have some sort of Python package that's installed for references. We have Django, and then we have SQL par. Now, this SQL parse is basically a required package for dealing with many of the SQL commands or database level commands within this Python project. Now, one thing I wanted to point out as well, once we run migrations or create our database tables, we're going to see a brand new database file show up. So let's go ahead and do that right now that I'm saying that. If I run the command python manage.py migrate, what this is going to do is it's going to look at all the models or all of the objects that we have in this project specifically, as well as the out-of-the-box system-generated models that's within this project, and it's going to generate a new db.sqlite3 database file. And this is essentially our database where we can store our data, update data, delete data, and so on. So let me hit enter. And you guys will see now it's applying all of the migrations. Now, if you're wondering what is a migration file, let's talk a little bit about that. So essentially, when you create a model, any kind of object, you would have in that specific app, let's say the folder in this case is called to-do list, you would have a migrations file, which is _migrations. And within that file, it would have a series of files that show essentially a thumbprint or a trail of changes to your database, changes to your model structure, changes to the fields and the attributes, and so on. And the reason why we have this in Django is to keep track of changes to our database so that whenever we deploy it to other services or other servers rather, basically it knows exactly how to apply those migrations. So that's why it's important for us to run this python manage.py migrate command, so that way we can always have the most up-to-date version of our data model within our database. So okay, so now that I've run that, we should have created here, yep, as you can see here on the side, we have several new files. We have a SQL file here, and we also have this db.sqlite3 file. Now, if I click on that, you guys will notice you see nothing. Now, there is a plugin that will allow you to see what's in your database, but later on, what I'm going to show you guys is the Django Admin panel, which will give you direct access to this database, so there's no need for you to use a special tool. It's completely built into the Django framework for you. So let me just go ahead and close out of that. All right, so now we've already frozen our packages into this requirements.txt, so that's all good to go, and I'll close out of that. So let me think here. I think the next thing that we want to do is let's go ahead and let's run this server to see if this is working perfectly. All right, so let me just clear my terminal here. Now, to run this project to see if it's working, we need to type the command python. And again, one thing I want to highlight here, guys, is if you notice earlier, we were typing Python 3, right? When we did the Python 3-m venv, right? If you guys recall that, that's how we created our virtual environment. But here, I'm typing just Python for these other commands. The reason why is, again, in a global context, when, before we enter, for example, let me just get out of this virtual environment. I'll just type here deactivate really quickly to show you folks something. If I wanted to create the virtual environment, again, because now I'm in a global context, because you see that the virtual environment has been deactivated, I'm now back in a global context. If I wanted to reactivate it, I would have to type the source activate, or if I wanted to create a new virtual environment, I would type Python 3-m venv, right? And that would create the brand new virtual environment. But again, I would type Python 3. If I type just Python and hit enter, I'm going to have an error message, right? The reason why is because Python 3, which is Python version 3, is the version that is installed globally within our project. So that's the reason why I can't just type Python when I'm working outside of the virtual environment. Hopefully that makes sense. However, if I were to reactivate this and type the source venv/bin/activate and hit enter, now I'm back in a virtual environment context. So if I clear that, now if I were to type Python 3, for example, and -v just to see the version, we see that information. But if I wanted to run this server, let's say, for example, I'm trying to clear this. Let's clear this. If I say Python 3 manage.py, to run the server, you would say run server. You can either run the server using Python 3, or you can run the server using Python manage.py run server, whichever you prefer. My preference is to use the Python 3 command when I'm in a global context outside of the virtual environment, and to just use Python when I'm within the virtual context, the virtual environment context. So Python manage.py run server. This is to run the server. Hopefully that made sense to you folks. It may sound a bit confusing. Again, in a nutshell, use Python 3 when you have not yet enabled or activated your virtual environment. You can use Python or Python 3 when you want to run your server. Okay, I prefer to use Python if my virtual environment has been activated. All right, so I just ran the server, so the server should be live now. So now if I were to go, let me just open up a browser here. All right, so if I were to go to this browser, to see your app in action, you have to go to localhost :8000. That's port 8000 on your computer. If you hit enter, now you'll see I have this Django project and it's up and running. Now I have dark mode enabled. I'm just going to disable that really quickly to give us the original colors. Perfect. So, okay, yeah, so we have this Django project running. It's telling us everything was set up successfully and configured successfully. However, that's not 100% true. So far, what we've accomplished is just setting up the initial pieces of the Django configuration just to get our app running. The next thing that we have to do here is set up our settings.py file, and we'll be doing that right now. Before we jump into our settings.py file to start configuring things, I'm going to set up a brand new app here. And as I mentioned before, a single Django project can have multiple apps. And we generally would create separate apps within one project to separate our code so that way things are nice and clean. So for example, you may have a project that would have an app called animals and then another app called people if you're generating a world object or a world project, for example. Or if you're generating a project that's about sports, you may have a team app and then you might have a player's app, for example. So they may not be the best examples I could think of, but generally you want to separate concerns within your application. So what I'm going to do now is let me just go ahead and stop the server. To stop the server on a Mac, you hold the control key and type C. And that should, stop the server. Cool. And let me just clear this out. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to create a new app, and we're going to create an app called to-do_list. So let's do that. Now, first, before we create the app, we want to make sure that we have the virtual environment activated, which we do have here, as you can see, because we have this prefix. Next up, let's just see what folder we're currently in. So if I ls, you'll see that we're currently in the same folder where the manage.py file is. This is very important because at this stage, everything that we're going to be running on the Python level will require the manage.py file, because that file contains all of the commands that we'll need to set up different things, such as creating a super user, or in this case, as I said before, starting a new application. So what I'm going to do is type Python manage.py, and we're going to now use the command start app, not start project, because remember, start project was part of the Django-admin command that we used to create this project in the first place. So now that we're using Python manage.py, we're going to use start app, and we're going to give this app a name. Let's call this to-do_list and hit enter. All right, so let's give that a moment. Now all right, it looks like it's done. So now it should have generated a brand new file or folder. Let's see where that is. So let's scroll down here. What I'm going to do here is, because we have a lot of files here, I'm just going to collapse this for a second and just reopen it. And as you guys can see right here, we have this brand new to-do list folder. So let's expand that. And as I mentioned before, we have this migrations folder. And if I were to expand migrations, we have several different files within it. Now this, again, if you guys recall, migrations is essentially the series of files or the set of files that are responsible for keeping our database model in sync. All right, so again, we need to have that init.py file in order for Django to pick this up as a file that should be read upon initialization of the project. And then we have a series of other files. For example, we have this admin.py, which we're going to get to shortly. Essentially, what this file does is it allows us to expose the data model to the Django admin panel. So that way we can directly work with the database using a nice and clean UI. We also have this apps.py file, and this file is a part of the initialization of the app as we run it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to reference this name in particular within our installed apps list in our settings.py, so that way Django's settings will know exactly where to find the app that should be initialized and at what time it should be initialized. Next, within this folder, we have the models.py, a very important file because it's here where we'll create a class or an object that would be the database table. So we would define a series of fields and attributes and give it special characteristics and so on. Test.py we can ignore, but if you wanted to write some unit tests for your code, which is a good practice, you would definitely write them here. And then we have views.py, which is where we're going to be writing our functions that would be calling various views. So think of views almost as being controllers, if you will, in an MVC pattern. All right, so now that we went through that, what I want to do first here is, let's see. I guess the first thing we can do is work with our settings.py. So let's open up settings.py. Now settings.py is in your root folder here, your root project folder. So if I open that up, we have a very, very long file here, many different configurations that have been pre-configured for us as part of this Django setup. So the first thing I want to do here is up top, I'm going to clean up some of these comments. So let's get rid of the first 11 lines of comments. And now I'm going to bring in a package, which is a built-in package called OS. So I'm going to type here on line number 1, import OS. And what OS does is basically stands for operating system. And it has several different functions, for lack of a better term, or commands that we can use to work with different routes within Python and within Django in itself. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So let me just bring this up here. So now that we've imported OS, we can go further down and start adding some more configurations. So on line number 22 here, we have this installed apps list. And if you look here, this is a list of various Django packages that get referenced here. And these are mandatory packages that's part of the Django framework. And every single new project that you'll create will have these packages pre-configured like this. So what we need to do is whenever and this is a rule of thumb, whenever you create a brand new Django app, like we did with Python manage.py start app, every time you create a brand new app, you need to update this installed apps list, or otherwise known as an array. And the reason why you need to update that is without this, Django won't know where to find this new app, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor at the end of line 28 and hit the enter key to make a new line. And I'm going to add a reference to this to-do list app that we just created. So single quotes, to-do _ list. And then as part of good practice, we just add a comma at the end of this, like this. Excuse me. All right, so now Django will know exactly where to find our to-do list. So that's all we need to do for this. Now, just to explain a few of these other configurations, we have this middleware configuration. This is a bit more advanced for this tutorial, but essentially if you had any kind of packages or special classes that you wanted to run as the program is loading, so as a page request is being served up, then whenever you define here, by default will automatically run on every single page request as part of the middleware package. So we're not going to be dealing with middleware in this crash course, but it's just something that you guys should know because it is a common thing to do when working with Django apps. So next I'll skip over this root underscore URL config. That's a default configuration setup for the URL routing. What I want to focus on next is this templates array. So this templates list that we have here, the only thing we really need to focus on is this DIRS or DIRS, short for directories array. And basically within this array, we would define our own path at which we would like to route any page request to a particular template. So for a common example for this, for example, would be, let's say that we have an index.html file located within a templates file that's within our app folder. So within our to-do list folder, for example. Then basically we would come here and we would tell Django to point any page request to the index.html file here by using a special routing configuration that we're going to set. So let me show you exactly how we do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up these brackets by making a new line here. And if you guys recall, we've imported that OS import at the very top. So we're going to use that right now. Let's type os.path.join. And what we're going to join, and what this does is this is basically going to concatenate these two values together. All right. So what we're going to join first is we have a variable up top called base underscore dir or base directory. And this is going to be the base or the root directory of this project. So instead of hard coding that, we can use this variables to just concatenate this as a prefix to this string. And then finally, we're going to add a string here. And within this string, we're just going to type the word templates like that. So basically what this line is doing, I'm just going to add a comma at the end. What this line is doing essentially is basically going to go to the base directory and it's going to look for a folder within the base directory of this app called templates. And then it's going to join those values together to make the full path to this directory. And so any page request is that's going to get served up on our server is going to look within this templates directory first for the view that we're going to create. So now what we need to do, since we've done that, is we need to actually create this templates folder here because it doesn't appear automatically. So I'm going to go back here to this to-do underscore list here on the left. I'm going to highlight that and I'm going to create a brand new folder, and that folder is going to be called templates. So let's do that right now. New folder, and we're going to call that templates and hit enter. So within this folder is where we're going to put all of our HTML files. Any kind of partial views or full views that we'll construct will go within this folder. And now we don't have to hard code every single absolute route or relative route. Everything will happen automatically for us because of this new configuration. All right. I think that's enough said about that piece. I'm just trying to think here. Now, I'll show you a couple of more things here while I'm in this file. We won't be changing much else, maybe just one other thing. Cool, so everything else that's within this templates we can ignore. That's all default, and that's out of the scope of this lesson. Let's see here. So we have this database or object. Now, by default, as I mentioned before, when we ran the python manage.py migrate command, it auto-generated a db.sqlite3 database file. And basically how that was generated is these lines right here. So this database list that we have here automatically generates a dev version of our database here. Now, if you wanted to create a production-ready version, you would obviously update this database or databases object and include production credentials to your database. There's plenty of tutorials online on how to do that. Guys, let me know in the comment section below if you want me to cover that in a future video. And while I'm at it, now that I remembered, please like this video if you like what we're doing so far. Share it with your community, and also make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon for future tutorials and crash courses just like these. Okay, let's move on here. So off password, that's also important if you wanted to change the validation of passwords within your application, because Django automatically comes, again, as I mentioned, with bells and whistles, which also includes password management and authorization and authentication. So you can actually make changes to your password validation logic here. And again, that's out of the scope for this lesson, just kind of giving you the high level. Some of these relate to time zones. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else. Okay, so the other thing we want to do is we want to add some static files. And now, what is a static file? Essentially, anytime that you would have CSS for styling or JavaScript for dynamic logic within your application, you won't just be able to just add it anywhere within your application. You actually have to add it to a specified location, which is usually a static directory or a static files directory, some people prefer to call it. So what we need to do first here is we need to, there's multiple ways of doing this. One thing I'll say about this, in all honesty, this process is a bit complicated in some cases, and it takes numerous tries if you mess up. I found that one of the easiest ways to do this is to just create the static directory manually instead of running the collect static command. So just creating the static directory manually and putting your CSS and JavaScript files within that directory. Now, we may have to run the collect static command in order for Django to pick up the static resources. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. Let's see. So what we want to do is we want this to be, let's put this within our current apps folder. So we're not going to put this in the project level folder. We're going to put this in the app folder. So let's highlight to-do list again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another new folder, and we're going to call this static. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is create a new file, and I'm going to call that file style.css because this is going to be our CSS file. Okay, and again, guys, make sure that this file is within your static directory. Now, if you look in the description of this video, the video description below, there's going to be a link to my GitHub repo. In essence of time, because I don't want this video to be too long, what I'm going to do is give you access to that repo, and I want you guys to go to the style CSS folder within the static directory, and I want you guys to copy all of the styling code that's within that directory, so that way we can save time, because otherwise we would be spending a lot of time writing out CSS, and that's not the focus of this video. So make sure you copy that code from style.css. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that right now, and I'm going to just paste that in like this, and just very high level so you guys can see what we have here. I just defined a few styles on the entire page, on the headings, on the links, the buttons, some basic CSS. So we're not using any special library here like Tailwind or Daisy UI or something like that. We're just defining, basic CSS here. So yeah, that's pretty much all we're going to do with styling. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to go back to my settings.py file. So let's explain what we've got so far here. So far we have this variable on line 110 called static_URL. And this is essentially the folder where our static resources are currently located. And by default, Django created this definition for us. We just needed to create the file in itself. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to set a static root, and then after that we're going to go to our urls.py file and add a few more configurations so that our styling will get picked up even in a dev environment. Now this may sound very complicated, and that's because it is. Okay, so I wish there were an easier way to do this, but that's generally the way that we would do it best in a Django environment. And trust me, guys, I think this is one of the hardest things to do. Everything else with Django is fairly easy. So let's go ahead and finish defining this static configuration. So there, we're going to set a new variable called static and this must be spelled to a T in all caps, static underscore root, and we're going to set that equal to, actually let's remove these single quotes. We're going to use our os.path.join trail like we did before. So let's do os.path.join and open up some parentheses here, and we're going to say base underscore directory like we did before, but this time we're going to use static. Now what this is basically going to do is when you run the command python manage.py collect static, it's going to automatically generate a static folder that's going to be located in your project level folder, not within the app folder, because if you guys recall, we just manually created a static folder within the app folder. Now, this line is still required even though we are not going to run collect static at this stage. We're going to see if this styling will work without running collect static, and if it doesn't work, we'll run collect static just in case, because again, this is the bane of many Python developers' existence here, is getting this part set up. So the last part we want to do here is, let's just go down. I think we're good with the settings.py file. I'm just going to close out of this. All right, so what we want to do next is we want to open up our urls.py file, which is here on the side. So let me just open that up. And this is the urls.py file that's a part of our project, not within the app. Okay, so this is project level. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here because we got a lot of comments. You can leave this if you want, these comments. I'm just going to get rid of it just so it's nice and clean what I'm looking at. And the first thing we notice here, we have some boilerplate code where they're bringing in a reference to the admin import, which is part of the Django admin panel. And then we have a reference to the path library within Django. And that's particularly used to set the routes within the file in itself. I'm going to bring in a few more imports here. The first one that relates to the static resources that we're working with right now will be from Django.conf, and let's import. First, let's bring in settings because we're going to need to be able to reference the static variables that we were dealing with a second ago. And then next, we're going to do from Django.conf .static. Actually, it's Django.conf.urls, I believe. Django.conf.urls.static. I believe that's what it is. Import. And what we want to do here is we want to import static. Okay. Now, if you guys are wondering where I'm getting this from, if you go to the Django documentation online, you could find out this information. It's pretty much sparse throughout all around, the documentation. It's not really in one particular area all the time, so you might have to do some fishing for this information, but it is available in their documentation online if you want to know exactly where I got that from. All right, so we brought in the static reference, and we've already brought in the settings. What we want to do now is we want to also bring in include. So down here on this line, the from Django.urls package import path, we also want to import include. And the reason why is we're going to use the include function to reference a particular app. So instead of hard coding the entire path of the app, which would generally not work in Django, we're going to use include and then pass it a specific string that would point to the app that we've created, in this case, the to-do list app. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. First, I'm going to add a new route before we handle the static part of this. Let's go ahead and add a route, because what I want to do is when the user starts the server and navigates to localhost :8000 to view the app, I want the home page to show immediately instead of the Django project page that we currently see. So let me go ahead and make a new line here. And I'm going to type in here path. I'm just going to put a comma at the end. And I'm going to, the path I want this to point to is just going to be an empty string. That means home page, or the home page path. Comma, we're going to use our include reference that we brought in above. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass in a string of to-do underscore list, which is the name of our app that we created, if you recall. .urls. And the reason why .urls is because we're going to create a urls.py file that's a part of that to-do list app. It doesn't exist currently, but we'll create that shortly. So whenever you want to basically add additional routes to the app itself, app level routing, you would say app name.urls, URLs to point directly to that app, okay? All right, so I think we're good there. Now, the last part to this is, if you guys recall, we've already set up our configurations. If I go back to settings.py and I go to the static root, you see up here that we've already set up our configurations or our paths to the static URL and the static root directory. So what I need to do now in this urls.py file is I need to add, because in the case of development, our dev environment, which we're in right now, sometimes static resources don't render properly or don't render at all unless we specify this command here. So let's go ahead and type this out. It's going to be rather long, but we're going to type a plus symbol because we're going to append this to the end of this list. So we're going to say plus static, and we're going to open up a set of parentheses, and next we're going to say settings, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our static underscore URL variable here. So basically that's going to be pointing to the static folder in itself, and then comma, and we're going to say document underscore root equals. Now this document underscore root is an attribute within this function, this static function. So now we're going to say document root is equal to settings dot static underscore root, which makes sense, right? We basically want to point the document root to the static root, and I think that's pretty much it. That's all we really need here. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that, and hopefully this is going to work. And again, if you were to run, because the Python manage.py collect static command that I mentioned earlier essentially takes all of the static resources, all images, all CSS, all JavaScript, and it automatically generates a folder in your project root to optimize these resources, because these resources would be used often. So Django has a way of optimizing that so that your application can run faster and it's more performant. But in this case, what I'm going to do is just set up, as I've already done, set up my own static file here or static folder. And if we need to, we could run collect static, especially in a production environment that's necessary. So that way Django knows exactly where to serve or where to serve these images, CSS, and JavaScript from, essentially. All right, so I think that's it for this file. So I think we can go ahead and close out of settings.py and urls.py. All right, so next what we want to do here is we want to go back to our to-do list folder, and we want to create a brand new urls.py file because we just created that configuration. So let's go back there. So we'll test. Sometimes it's really hard to kind of see where this begins here. Templates. What I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this. And where are we? Up here, sorry. Okay, so we are here in our to-do list. What we're going to do is we're going to create this brand new urls.py file. So let's go ahead and create a new file, not folder, a new file. I'm going to say urls.py and make sure that this is within the to-do list app. So I'm going to hit enter. And now we have nothing pre-populated here because, again, we're creating our own urls.py. So what I'm going to do now is, to save some time, let me just open up the other urls.py again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy all of this code here. And I'm going to go back to my other URLs and I'm going to paste this in. So now that we've copied the other urls.py file into this one, what we need to do is just make a couple of edits to this one. So again, guys, I'm in the urls.py file that's part of the to-do list app, not the one that's in the project directory, just to point that out. So What we want to do now is we want to make a few edits. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of a couple of these imports. Let's get rid of settings because we don't need that. We'll get rid of the import static. We'll get rid of the import admin. And I think we can get rid of the include import. And let's just bring these lines up. And I'm going to import one more package, and that's going to be from .import views. Now, why views? Well, views represents the views.py file. And the views.py file that's a part of this app, this to-do list app, if I were to open this one up here, you'll see here we have this views.py file, which just has one import statement in it. And essentially what this file's responsibility is it basically wires all of the page requests directly to the view itself. So any function that we put in this file will directly serve a specific page, a specific HTML page. So what we're going to do shortly is we're going to define several different functions in this file. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that now because what we can do is we can set up our scaffold for this file, so that way we can come back later and populate each and every function as needed based on what we're trying to do, because we're going to be also working with the database here as well. So let's see. The first thing I want to do here is I'm going to bring in a couple of imports. So on the first line up here, on line number 1, we have this from Django.shortcuts import render. We're going to bring in a couple of more packages or a couple of more objects within this package. So we're going to say comma, we're going to bring in redirect. That's going to allow us to redirect the user to a different page after, for instance, a form submission or an error message. Then we're going to bring in get object underscore or underscore 404. And basically what this function does, it fetches an object or a record from the database. But if for some reason that object does not exist in the database, then it's going to return a 404 not found message to the view. Okay, so that's a very nice method or function that doesn't really exist in any other programming language that I know of. They may exist in other libraries, but it's very nice that it's built directly into Django because it reduces the amount of complex error handling code that we normally would have to write in that case. Okay, so now the next import I'm going to bring in here is from, well, normally next what I would bring in is the models as well as the forms, but we don't have those defined yet. We haven't defined our database models, and we have not yet defined our forms. So what I'm going to do next for now is I'm just going to create the scaffolded functions, the view functions that we're going to need. Now, in this case, we're just going to be doing function-based views. If we were working with other libraries such as the Django REST framework, which is essentially how you build API endpoints, there's something called class-based views. So let me know in the comments below, guys, if you want me to cover the Django REST framework. It's basically a way to build REST API endpoints using Django. So you would be using similar conventions to what we're using right now, and it's pretty cool. And in fact, I've used it in many projects. So let me know below, guys, if you want me to cover that in another video. But anyway, getting back to this, let's set up some scaffolded functions here. So we're going to say def, which is a Python keyword that defines a new function. This is also the same in Ruby on Rails from my understanding. So we're going to say def to-do underscore list. That takes in a page request. And I'm just going to use the pass keyword for now, so that way this does not return an error because we're just setting up the scaffold. We don't actually have any code that does anything here. So we're just going to do a pass, which is almost like a return statement. All right, so yeah, we need a view for the list. We're going to need a view for the task detail page. So we're going to say def. One thing I'm going to point out shortly, but def task underscore detail also takes in a request, and we're going to use the pass as well. And I believe this one would also take in a primary key. So it's going to have two arguments, a request and a primary key. The PK and primary key is usually the record ID. It's usually synonymous with that, but you can actually override that and make your primary key a different field that's indexable in the search engine, indexable in the database rather. But in this case, yeah, the PK is going to be the record ID. Now, one thing I wanted to point out here as well is that when we're working with these various views here, we just need to keep in mind that we're going to have to set these up to be directly connected to our URL routes, which we're going to do shortly. And I'll show you exactly what I mean shortly. So let me just finish these up. We're going to say def add task because we're going to have a view in which we're going to be able to add task to our database. We're going to set that to pass. And that one does not take a primary key because it's a brand new task, which makes sense. We're going to have another one called edit underscore task. That one's going to take in a request and a primary key, which is the record ID. And we're going to say pass on that. And then lastly, we're going to have a final one, def delete underscore task, passing in request and a primary key on that as well. And we're going to pass on that. All right, so these are the scaffolded methods. Again, so far they do nothing, but we're going to come back and once we're done setting up our models and forms, we're going to come back, import them in, and then start to work with the actual underlying data. So now what we're going to do next is let's go back to our urls.py within the to-do list app again, not on the project level, but the to-do list app. And we're going to need to clean up a few things here because remember, we copied this code below from the project level urls.py. So first I'm going to get rid of this plus static line right here. I'm just going to make sure I leave that ending closing square bracket here. And I'm going to get rid of this admin. We don't need that as well. Let's just leave this one line for now. So basically what we're doing here is we're defining an empty string here as well. So just imagine if our website, for example, was called abc123.com, because we've defined an empty string as part of our project level URLs. Like for example, if I go back to our project level URLs page here, that's under the Django crash folder, this is our project level urls.py. And basically in here, we've defined also, actually what we need to do is we need to come back here and replace that with this. What's going on here? I'm not sure what happened there, but that should be, yes, okay, that should be an empty string, not list. So if you have a list there, guys, just make this an empty string. I may have been demonstrating something earlier, and I forgot to delete it, but yeah, basically this path right here is an empty string. So if we typed in abc123.com as our domain name, basically Django is going to come here. It's going to look for this empty string because this is the home page, and then it's going to say, okay, I need to look in the to-do underscore list urls.py file. As we've defined here, this to-do underscore list.urls points to the urls.py file in our to-do list app. So now if I go back to the other urls.py file, within here, we have basically also defined an empty string as our path, which means that essentially this abc123.com is going to serve up whatever view we pass in here shortly, right? Now, if we had like another page that let's say that refers to adding a task like abc123.com/add, for example, then we would need to have another path down here that says add, right? So for example, let's imagine it's this one. We'll just say add here, and now this this route here will be directly linked to the view that we specify over here. All right, so let me just get rid of that. I just wanted to kind of run through that. Basically, whatever we define in our urls.py that's part of our project level would definitely point directly to whatever it corresponds with. Whatever we write within that include function is going to pass that routing responsibility to that particular subpath. In this case, this file right here. So I'm just going to get rid of this right here. I'm going to finish this routing here. So first of all, let me just get rid of this second argument here because we don't need this include. What we're going to do instead is we're going to use the views that we're bringing in, this views.py that we just defined where we built our scaffolded functions. We're going to bring in the views.py, and the first view we're going to bring in is the to-do underscore list. So let's type here as a second argument, views.to-do underscore list, comma, and we're going to give this a name. We're going to say name is equal to, and as a string, to do underscore list. So basically, again, when we go to abc123.com, or if we go to localhost colon 8000 here on our dev server, our Django dev server, basically is going to point directly to this page here. Now, of course, we haven't set up the HTML file for that. We're going to be doing that shortly. But once we set that up, it's going to pretty much bring up the home page, this route. All right, so let me go ahead and save that. I just want to make sure I've saved everything. And I think I did. Okay, so next up, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and start defining, or let's just start setting up some of our HTML files. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is, let me just collapse this. This is getting a little bit hectic here to kind of follow. Just collapse a few of these things here. Okay, let's start from here. Okay, so now we want to expand the to-do list. And let's see, what do we need from here? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work directly first with the templates before I jump to the models. Okay, so in the templates folder, I'm just going to highlight that. The first thing I'm going to bring in here is a base.html file, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using some Google fonts as well as some Font Awesome fonts. And instead of copying the code to every single HTML file in our application, I want to be able to reuse some of these components, right? Some of these references. So let me show you exactly what I mean. So I'm highlighting right now, I'm highlighting the templates folder. What I'm going to do is create a new file called base.html. So let's do that. Let's add a new file, call it base.html, and hit enter. So this is going to be an HTML file. All right. Now I have, I think Visual Studio Code automatically comes with the ability to auto-generate HTML. It may be part of the emit package, but if I type in HTML:5, it's going to give me an HTML5 snippet that I can use. So I hit enter, and now you can see it auto-generated HTML for me. All right. So it's just a quick way of doing it. All right. So what I want to do here is I want to bring in a couple of libraries, a couple of CDN references or and links that I'm going to use time and time again. But I'm also in this file, I'm also going to add a couple of Django references here, a couple of Django Blade references. So basically, we're going to be using some Django special syntax to render certain blocks within our application so that we can reduce code repetition here. So the first thing I'm going to do is this title tag that's here. As you can see, it auto-generated a document title as the title of this page. I'm going to get rid of that, okay? Because what I'm going to do instead is, depending on the page that we're on, we need to be able to pass that value directly into this base HTML. So first off, let me just double check something here. I believe I have an extension installed. Let me just click on the gear icon in the bottom left here, Visual Studio. And if I click on extensions, and if I type Django, I have an extension called Django installed. And basically, let me just open that up so you guys can see it. The current version is 1.14.0, and basically, I believe this extension allows me to auto generate certain types of snippets in Django, and it also gives me code completion capabilities as well. So you guys might want to download that. Make sure you download it from this Baptista person. Because this is the one that I'm using. You can use any one of them would work, but I would suggest doing that because I'm going to be saving some time by just using some of the code snippets. And a quick correction, guys, earlier I said Django Blade, but that's actually a Laravel convention. It's actually called Django Template Language. So yeah, we're going to be using Django Template Language to render dynamic values, to create blocks, pass in values. It's basically it's a very sleek way of us avoiding code repetition. Let me show you some examples here. Let me just first of all define this. Let me close out of this. extensions tab. And what I'm going to do is, let's close a few other tabs here. Let's close this URLs for now. Let's go back to our base.html here. And as I mentioned, we're going to have like the title is going to change, right? The title is going to change depending on the page that we're currently on. So what we need to be able to do is to pass that value here. So let's go ahead. There's actually a template tag called block in Django template language. So if I type block and I hit enter, as you guys can see, it's going to auto create this block. Now a Django template tag, there's different types. This one, anything that has like the curly braces and percentage signs, essentially would represent a block of code or a certain section of your code. We're going to later get to one that has double curly braces, which would represent outputted values. So I'm going to call this block title. Let's call it the title. Okay. And in this block, what we need to be able to do here is we need to be able to accept dynamic values for the title. Now, this is going to happen by default as we defined title, block title on other templates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a default title so that if no title is passed into other pages, we're going to automatically render to-do list like that. So again, if we don't set block title in other templates, it will automatically default this to to-do list for us, which is pretty neat. We don't have to do a lot of work there. Let me just get rid of this. I don't know why I have it twice. Just make sure you only have that once. Okay? Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in the Google Font CDN, right? Because I want to be able to use Google Fonts, and that's also part of our styling currently. So we're going to say Google Fonts CDN. Okay? So let me just grab the link for that. And guys, if you need the links for this, it's in my GitHub repo below. So just check the video description and you should be able to grab that links from this base HTML class. All right, so let me just paste that here. So this is the link to Google Fonts. And then we're gonna have one more to Font Awesome. So I'm gonna say Font Awesome CDN. Okay, now so what, for those who don't know what a CDN is, it's basically a hosted version of a library that will allow you to quickly bring in that library as a reference, a link reference, so that you can use it within your project. There's no need for you to do a separate installation of the package when you do it this way. Now, there are pros and cons to it, obviously, but I'm not going to get into that right now into this video. So yeah, we've brought in both of those links. It looks good. Trying to think if there's something else we need to do. So the other thing we need to do is we need to bring in our styles.css link, right? Because we've already defined that. We've already added those styles to this project under the static folder. So to do that, what we need to do is we need to say link again, and let's say link rel, and the rel is basically going to be, this is, you know, the relationship of this link is going to be style sheet. And here, what we're going to do is define an href in double quotes. And in this href, what we're going to do is we're going to type the word static. And again, my template tag is going to make a suggestion. My auto completion, rather, is going to make a suggestion of this right here. So if I hit enter, it's going to automatically add a static template tag here. And so what I need to do now is bring in the style.css, because remember, this file, if I were to just kind of do a command P to show you this style.css, as you can see here in this path above, is actually part of our static path. Okay, that's the reason why we're using static here. Let's just put a closing brace here. Okay, now whenever we deal directly with static resources in a Django project, we actually have to also import that static at the very top of our file. So let's do that right now. So at the top of our file, we need to load this static, otherwise it's not going to work. So on line number 1 at the very top, I'm going to bring this down, and I'm going to say, I'm going to just type the word load. Or actually, you know what? Let's type this out. We're going to give it curly braces, and then we're going to give it a set of parentheses like that, and make some space. We're going to type the word load static. That's it, just these two words, load static. And now any static reference on this page, as we are doing down here, will be recognized, right? Because we're actually loading the static capabilities within this file. All right, so what else did I want to do here? Cool, so we've got that set up. All right, so let's work on our body. Now in our body, what we've defined in the style.css file is we define a few classes for styling. Now, I'm not going to go into specifics on the styling, as I mentioned before. What we're just going to do is just use the class references where applicable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a main tag. And in that main tag, we're going to just output the block content that gets passed from the different templates. So if you're familiar with like React or other front-end frameworks, whenever you're working with like a component in React, for example, you have your shell, which is in the latest versions of React, your shell would be your root layout, and in prior versions it would have been the _app folder in Next.js, for example, or the app.jsx file in React. And basically any single component that you create, whether it's a homepage component or anything else, would get rendered. It actually would get passed through that file and then get rendered as a child node to that component. In this case, it works similarly in Django. Essentially what we're going to be doing is creating this main tag, and you don't have to create a main tag. I just like to do this for styling reasons. So I'm going to just define a class here of container, which is part of our styling in our CSS file. And now the part that I'm talking about here is if you come here and you say curly braces, set of percentage signs, type the word block, content. Basically, let me just copy this and then paste it one more time. I'm just going to say here, end block, like that. Basically, what this is going to do now is anything I'm passing in as block content from a different file, a different HTML file, will get rendered here. So it's almost like passing components in front-end frameworks. It's a very similar concept, okay? All right, so let me show you exactly how that works. So now this base HTML finally is complete. So all we need to do now is in any other HTML file that we'll create, we just need to extend the behavior of this base HTML to that particular HTML file. So the next file I'm going to work on here, guys, is I'm going to work on the to-do list HTML file. All right, so let's go back here to our side here, our sidebar, and I'm going to create a brand new file. I'm going to call that to-do-list.html and hit enter. So here we go again. We have a brand new HTML file. Now, normally what you would have to do before is, before we made that change, is normally you would then add another HTML snippet like that, and then you would define your styles and your elements here. But remember, we have that base HTML file, so we don't have to repeat this doc type code and all this code up here, this meta code. We don't have to do that. Instead, what we can do now is we're going to do curly braces, percentage sign, extends, and then all we need to do is extend the base.html file. That's all we need to do, okay? And if you have the Django extension installed, you can just also type extends, like, I'm not typing correctly here. I'm sorry. Extends like that. There we go. And hit enter, and it would automatically be created for you. All right. But I typed it out so that you guys can see it in action. All right. So now we've extended this behavior from base HTML, which essentially means we're importing that HTML code within that file. Now what we want to do is we want to set our title for this particular page, because this is the home page. So let's say we want a different title. I'm just going to type block to save some time and hit enter, and it's going to give me some more template tags. And in here, I'm going to say title, okay? And in between these tags, now I can set whatever title I want. So I'm going to call this to-do home, to-do home, okay? So now what's going to happen is when this view loads, I'm not sure again what's going on. I think this is some double entry happening. Okay, let's just make sure that there's just one to-do home instance here. When this page loads, it's automatically going to pass this value into our base HTML. And one thing I want to point out is this block title must be named the same. Basically, this name right here must match. If I open up base HTML again, it must match the title above here. If you guys can see here on this line number 7, it must match this title right here. They must match. If they don't match, this is not going to work, guys. So make sure that this matches. So the value that we're passing from the to-do-list HTML file will override this to-do list value, and it's going to output to-do home, just to explain that. Okay, let's go back to our to-do-list HTML, and let's move on. And again, you guys are probably starting to see that this is a much cleaner way of writing the code. It's much quicker. So now I'm going to bring in another block, and this is going to be our content block. And again, we've defined that also in the base HTML. All right, so let's go ahead and write the code, and I can show you exactly what's happening here. All right, so the first thing we want to do, let's see. Let's create a div, and that div is going to have a class, and let's give it the class of to-dos-heading. And let's close that div out. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, now let's open up that div. I notice my autocomplete is not, I have other extensions installed and I notice it's not working in this case. So yeah, I could do some additional configuration to make it work, but I'm too lazy to do it. So let's create a new h1 tag here. And in this h1 tag, we're just gonna call this to-do list, and put a closing tag. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define, let's see, let's define our link. And for the link text, actually we won't have text here. Let me just close this out with an a tag, and I'm just going to open this up. What we're going to have here instead is a button, right? Because we're going to wrap this button with a link. So we're just going to have opening and closing button. And the reason why we're doing that is we don't want to have to use JavaScript to do an on-click event to do the routing. So we just want to give the appearance of a button here. So we're going to call this add new task. And let's see here. Okay, we're going to call this add new task. And then for the link to this, what we're going to do now, what we normally would do, for example, let's say we had a page called add, and we define that as part of our URL routes. Well, in other programming languages, if you wanted to point this link to that page, you would just do /add, right? While that might work in Django, it is not the recommended way, okay? The recommended way to redirect to a specific URL is to use a template tag called the URL tag, like this. So we can say URL, and let me just auto-generate that. Like that, we can say URL, and then in this URL we would give the name, not the path to the URL. We would give the name. So for example, we would give a name of add task in this case. Now let me show you where that comes from. This is not, I'm not making this up here. What I would normally do is in our, let's go back to our urls.py file of the to-do list app. Make sure you're in the to-do list apps urls.py, not the project. In here, you would have this name attribute, right? And this is where you would get that value from. Now, as you guys can see, we haven't defined one for add task yet. So let me just go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to say path, and I'm going to add a new route. So we're going to call this one add, like that, comma, views, dot, and we've already created that add task function in the views.py. Comma, and we're going to say name, and that's going to be equal to the add task that we just used, and a comma like that. So now we've added this add task. So now if I go back to the to-do list file, this is where that's coming from, right? It's coming from, you know, this value is coming from the urls.py file, right? So they may match, they must match rather. You should not do this. Do not do this, guys. It's not going to work. You're going to get an error message. Okay, it must be the name, not the actual URL path. I hope that's clear. Okay, let's see, where were we now? All right, so we've created this button, which is actually a link. And we did that so that way we can avoid using an on-click event, because I don't want to use JavaScript in this tutorial because it would muddy the waters, I think. So I just want to keep it pure Django and Django template tags. All right, let's define another div. Say div class. We're going to call this one, say to-dos. All right, div. All right, so now in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to use a for loop. Now to use a for loop, and again, just for the newbies here, a for loop is basically a construct which allows us to repeat a certain block of code based on a given condition. So that way we can avoid copying the code over and over again. So let me show you an example of what I mean. I'm going to define a for loop. I'm just going to type the word for, and I'm going to hit enter. And that's going to automatically give me the for loops template tags. So what we want to do is when we work on our view, we're going to be passing in an attribute called to-dos. And in fact, you know what? Let me go ahead and do that right now so that way this is out of the way. All right, so let me go back to, let's skip this for now, guys. Let's go back to our views.py because I want to show you guys exactly what we're going to do here. So that way it's clear to do this logic in logical steps. So we're going to work first on this to-do list function. So we've already defined a scaffold, if you recall. I'm going to get rid of this pass keyword because what we're going to do now is we're going to need to be able to fetch the data and return it to the view. And actually, now that I think about it, we haven't even defined our models yet. So as you can see, working with a Django project, there's quite a bit of elements involved here. Let me just put the pass back here. Let's transition actually to defining our models, because we're going to need to define the models in order to work with this code here. All right, so what are models? Models are basically the database tables and the underlying data that represent our application. So the actual models that we'll define will be in our models.py file, which is a part of our to-do list app. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the left sidebar and I'm going to open up our models.py as you see here. So the models.py is right here, guys. Let's open that up. And we have, a very basic file. We just have a single import of models. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create essentially a new class called to-do item. And basically that's going to create a new database table for us with the specified fields. All right, so let me show you what I mean. So we're going to type here class, and we're going to call this again to-do item. And that's going to be inherited from models.model. And we're going to add a colon to the end of that. The colon represents the end of the line. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 fields here. Title, description, and completed. So the first one's going to be title. We're going to, because what we want to do is we want to allow the user to add a title to the task. So we're going to say models. And again, this models is coming from the import above, guys, from django.db. So it's models. And we have a function called char field. And that stands for character field. So it's basically text. And the char field can take in an attribute called max_length. And basically, I'm going to set that to a max length of 200 characters, which means that the user can only enter up to 200 characters in that field. If they enter more than 200 characters, then an error message will be displayed and form submission would immediately stop. Okay? So the next thing we want to do is define a description. And that's going to be equal to models.text field. And again, we can specify a max length. I'm going to set that much larger because this is going to be longer text. So I'm going to set that to 2,000 characters. Okay, I'll be pretty generous. And then lastly, what we want is a checkbox. So I'm going to set a checkbox called complete, or rather completed. That's going to be equal to models.boolean field. Okay. and I want the default of this to be equal to false with a capital F. Okay, got to make sure that the F is capital, and likewise for true, the T needs to be capital. This so Python recognizes true and false values with capital T and F respectively. Okay. All right, so those are the only three fields that we want. I'm also going to define a string field function here. So type this out: def underscore underscore str underscore underscore opening parentheses, and we're going to pass in self as a parameter or an argument, and then a semicolon, and then all we're going to do is return self.title. Now, what does this mean? This underscore underscore str represents basically a string representation of whatever value we're returning. And where this is displayed, this is normally displayed in our database table. So when we look at a database record, basically this value, if it's related to another like table, for example, let's say we had like another table that was like to-dos, and then this to-do item is a relational object, then this title would be rendered as part of the field's output, right? So it would show like the titles of each and every to-do item. Okay, that's the reason why we're doing this. And I'll show you guys that in a second. You can see that within our database. Okay, so we're pretty much done with this file. While I'm at it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define our admin.py file. And I covered that very briefly earlier, but let's go ahead and open it again. So again, admin.py is within the same to-dos list app here. So I'm just gonna use a shortcut and say admin.py. And again, make sure it's in the to-do list app folder. So far we have this, virtually nothing. So I'm just gonna get rid of this comment. And as you guys can see, we're bringing in this admin import up top. But what we need to do now is bring in our model, our new model. So I'm going to say from .models import to do item. Okay, and this is essentially bringing in the model we just declared. And the reason why we need to do that is because we need to register this model with our admin panel so that we can see this in our database. We can see this within the Django admin panel in itself. So the next thing we need to do is just one line of code, and that's going to be admin.site.register. And what we need to do is we need to register the to-do item like that. And that's pretty much it for admins.py or admin.py. All right, so let's, now as you know, we've already made some edits to our models.py. And if you recall from earlier in this video, we need to now migrate these changes because we made a change to a models file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, I think we've already stopped our server. Let me just do a clear here to start from scratch. The first thing we need to do is we need to make the new migrations file, because if we just ran python manage.py migrate, nothing will happen because we haven't made the migrations yet. So first we're going to type in python manage.py make migrations and hit enter. Okay, so we have an error message here. So we have a message with static root OS. So I think that's in our settings.py. Let's go back to settings.py and see. Static root OS. I think we're having an issue here. So I'm importing OS. All right, so what's the problem here? Syntax error. Invalid syntax. OS. I think it's os.path, right? os.path.join. So we're not having, where else do we do that? Okay, so this is valid here. All right, os.path. I'm not sure when that's acting up. I'm just going to copy this from the, what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to copy this entire line from the templates just to make sure that we don't have any character problems here. And down here, I'm just going to get rid of this and I'll retype it. Oh, I know why. It's because I'm missing, now that I'm looking at it, it's because I'm missing the equal sign. So let's just make sure we have an equal sign there. All right. One other thing I want to point out, guys, also is, it's easy to make these kind of mistakes in any programming language, but Python is very unforgiving. And what I mean by that is this. For example, in other programming languages, you'll have curly braces to open and close a set of like a code block. So for example, just to show a quick example, if you wanted to have an if statement, like if true, for example, in JavaScript, you would do something like this, right? You would have curly braces, and this would symbolize the start and end of a code block, right? But in Python, it's more like if true, and then you have to have indented text as part of your code block. There is no concept of curly braces with regard to code blocks. So if you wrote code like this, for example, if true, return true, for example, may not be the best example. This would cause an error message, as you can see, right? So you need to make sure things are properly indented, all right? And the same thing goes, make sure that you also include your equal signs and things like that where they need to be, because it's a very unforgiving language, which is also a very good thing. All right, so now this should be fine. Let's go ahead and let's just clear our terminal. Let's run the same command, python manage.py make migrations. And as you guys can see, it's created the model, but we're not done yet, because all it's done is it's generated the migrations file for us within the project. So now what we need to do is to apply those migrations. So we're going to do python manage.py migrate and hit enter. And now we should have the brand new migration applied to the database. So we should have a brand new table. Now, how can we see the database before we move on? Well, the only way that we can see, there are two ways. The one way is we can go directly to the db.sqlite file, but we would need to have like a tool installed. I would think like the SQL viewer tool. I don't really use it very often. Some people do. I don't really like it that much. What I generally do is I work directly with the admin panel of Django. So what I'm going to do now is, first I'm going to create a new super user, because we need to have an admin user who's able to log into that panel to see the data in the first place. So let's clear the terminal again. And there's a command called python manage.py create super user. And let's hit enter on that. Now first it's asking us for a username. For the username, I'm just going to give it Codeversity. For the email address, I'm going to give it, let's just say, admin@codeversity.com. That address does not exist, guys, so just to let you know. And then password, I'll just give it any kind of password here, and I'll give the same password again. Hopefully I typed it in correctly. All right, so good. It looks like that super user has now been generated. All right, so now we should have one user in our database as well, and this user should have admin access. So now how do we see this? First of all, we need to run our server again. So let's say python manage.py run server. And now it looks like the server is running. So now if I flip back to our browser, let's give it a refresh. There may be some error messages, and there are. That's fine. What we don't want this route anyway. The route that we want, let me just open up a new tab here. I'm going to go to localhost :8000/admin. And this is going to give us our admin panel, as you can see here. And now we need to log in. So the username was Codeversity. And I'll give it the password that I set. If I hit enter, now we're in the admin panel. Let me just save that so we can quickly get in. Okay, so now we're in the admin panel. So as you guys can see, now we have an actual UI that we can work with. So let me just kind of go over some of the top level things here. So the first thing we see here is a database table that's called groups. If I click into that, this is the area where you can actually create various user groups of your application. If I click on add group, you'll see what I mean. So you have all of these predefined configurations and groups in the database that you can use, and you can assign certain levels of permission and access to these groups. So it's a pretty advanced feature that you can use straight out of the box without writing a single line of code. We're not going to be using groups right now. I want to let you guys know a little bit more about the users table right here. Let's click on users. And here we have the user I created, the Codeversity user, which is an admin user. And how can you tell if it's an admin user? Well, first of all, I'm logged in. But if I clicked on this record here, you can see some more information here about the Codeversity user. And if you notice here, it shows that I'm active because the active box is checked. The staff status is checked, which means I'm a staff member, which means I have elevated permissions. I can see certain types of data that standard users can't even get access to. And furthermore, I have super user access, which means I can also edit user records, delete users. I can do anything to my heart's content with this user that I'm logged in as. And there's some other configurations below. Also, there's a direct relationship to user groups from the user object, or the user table rather. So yeah, it's a very powerful out-of-the-box solution, and it's fully customizable as well. If you don't want things set up this way, you can actually override the default Django user management setup and create your own user manager classes that would handle a lot of the provisioning of users, but a little too complicated for this video. Let's move on. So now the thing that you probably have noticed is that we have a brand new table, and this is the table that we created called to-do items. Let's click on that. And as always, we have no records because we haven't populated anything yet. So we don't have any records in this database. But if I click on add, you guys can see that I can actually add a record here. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll say, buy bananas. Say pick up bananas from the supermarket. Okay. And I'll leave that, I'll leave completed as unchecked, and I'll just click save. So now we have one record in the database table, in this to-do items table called by bananas. So once we get our app code set up, then we'll be able to see this render to the page. So yeah, that's pretty much on a very high level, the Django admin panel. This is fully customizable. I mean, you can override this Django administration text here with an actual logo. You can change the colors of this. You can do so many different things with this panel. And, again, in the comment section, if you want to see it in action, let me know. And I can do a more intermediate or advanced course in Django. This is just a fundamentals course. So we're not going to go very deep into that right now. All right, so let's go back. We can ignore this message for now because we haven't finished writing our code. Let's go back to Visual Studio. Okay, so we've already set up our models and our admin. I think what we can do now is we can set up our forms since we set up our models. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a forms.py file. So let's click on the to-do list again. Let's make sure we're in the right folder. Where is it here? It's a little confusing. Models.py. This is just click on here because the folder structure is a little confusing here. I'm going to create a new file, and that's going to be called forms.py. Okay, now what am I doing here? So the forms.py file is basically going to allow us to create a data-bound form in Django. So it's going to create a form that's bound directly to the data that's in our model. And it's a quick way of generating form submissions and handling form submissions rather, without the need of worrying about handling a lot of the ugly upkeep code when it comes to submitting a form or when it comes to generating the form. We still have to generate and create the form HTML, but that data is directly bound to the model through this forms.py. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working on this file. So the first thing I want to do, let's see, how do we want to do this? The first thing I'm going to do is bring in a couple of references. So the first reference I'll bring in is from Django. This is going to come from the Django library. We're going to import forms. Okay. From Django import forms. I believe that's what it is. Okay, next we're going to say from.models import, and what we want to do is import the to-do item model that we created. All right. And now we're going to create a new class. It's going to look very similar to our model class, but we're going to be using form-specific functions to define this. So we're going to say class to do form parentheses, and now we're going to extend or inherit from the forms.model form class, right? And now with this model form inherited class, this parent class, with this, what we can do is create a meta object. And from that, we can create a widgets object that would essentially bind the field data directly to form elements. So let me show you what I mean. So within this class, we need to define another class. Let me just correct this. It should say class, okay? Let's create another class within this. So make sure that you've indented and you're within this class. So we're going to say, again, class meta, M-E-T-A, colon. And here, what we need to do is type model, because we need to set our model. And we're going to set that to the to-do item, okay? So that way we know exactly what model we're working with. Next up, we're going to set our fields list. So square brackets here. And for our fields list, we're going to say it's the fields that we created in our model. So it's going to be title, comma, description, comma, completed. Like that, okay? Lastly, we're going to define a widgets object. So make sure you're using curly braces here because it's an object. And within this object, the key of the first entry is going to be title as a string, and then colon, and then we're going to bring in forms dot text input, forms dot text input, opening closing parentheses. And now we need to give it a special attribute list. So we're going to say ATTRS for attributes. And this is going to be equal to, and this is going to be equal to an object. So let's set an object. And first, the only thing I want on this first field is I want to define the placeholder of the input field. So we're going to say placeholder, which is going to represent the HTML attribute. And for the placeholder, we're going to say enter title, dot, 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 and then comma, right? So I'm just going to copy this and paste it 2 more times. The next one's going to be description. And for description, that's also going to be a text input. Actually, you know what? We're going to make this a text area. It's going to say text. Let's see. Yeah, let's make it a text area. Right? We can make this a text area. And we're going to give it some attributes, and it's going to be, again, placeholder. So for this placeholder, we're going to say enter description. We're going to enter description, and let's set a rows attribute on it as well, now that I think about it. So we're going to do a comma rows, and because we want to give it enough space, vertical space, so we're going to say 6. So it should be 6 rows long, okay? And then finally, for this one, we're going to say completed. And instead of a text input field, let's delete that. This one's going to be, actually we can get rid of all of this because we won't have a placeholder. So we're just going to say forms.checkbox input. And that should do it. All right, so that should be our forms.py. So that should all be set up now. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to be, when we work with the views in a second, we're going to pass an instance of this form directly into the view and then render the form out directly to the view. So that's the relevance of this file here. All right, so let's clean a few things up. I'm just going to close all the tabs here. We shouldn't have to migrate anything else because we've already migrated our data. So let's see, where are we? Let me just reopen our urls.py within our to-do list. Okay, so far we've got add and we've got the home page. All right, so I think we're fine there. Now let's open up views.py in the same directory. So views.py of to-do list. And in our views.py, we now need to start, now that we've set up our forms and our models, we need to bring those in actually up top. All right, so let's bring in those imports. On line number 2, I'm going to say from.models import to do item, and from.forms import to do form. All right, so now we're bringing those in, and now we can get rid of this pass and we can start working on our to-do list. Now, for our to-do list, what we need to do is we need to fetch a list of all of the available tasks or to-dos, for lack of a better term, directly from the database. Now, there are many ways to do this, but I'm going to try to do this the simplest way possible so that way you guys can understand exactly how this works. All right, so first of all, let's figure out how to simplify this as much as we can. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a list of to-dos, okay? So let's go back up here. Let me just make sure we're good here, indentation-wise. Yes, we are. This is to create a new variable called to-dos, and we're going to set this variable to to-do item dot. And what Django provides us is when we're working with data within the database, we don't have to use actual SQL statements. We don't have to use SQL statements at all. So we don't have to do, for example, select all from blah, blah, blah. We don't have to do that. We have this ORM, the Django ORM, which is very powerful and allows us to just call a set of methods because it's a code-first approach. And it allows us to call a set of methods to fetch data, update data, delete, and so on. So let me show you how to fetch data first. We're going to say to-do items or to-do item dot objects dot all, and that's going to return all of the to-dos or all of the tasks. All right, and all we need to do for this is going to be the simplest function here. We're just going to return render because we want to render the page. The first argument will always be request, and the second argument will be the name of the HTML file that we would like to return. So in this case, we want to return this to the to-do-list.html file. And then the third argument, which is optional, will be an object of the various arguments that we would like to return. Now, in this case, we only want to return the to-dos. So let's say to-dos colon to-dos. So the first to-dos here is the key. So this is going to represent the variable that we're going to be referencing in the actual view. And then the second to-dos here is coming from this line here. This is the list of to-dos that we fetched from the database. So let's go ahead and save that. And now I'm not sure if this would render. Let's try to run this and see what happens. Let me flip back to my browser. And now if I go back here and if I refresh, okay, it looks like we have an error message or something's not running. Let me go back here. I think we have to run our server or something else. Okay, yeah, we have an error message. So module not found. Module named to-do underscore list dot models. That's because we forgot the D. Okay, so moels. That is in what file? That's in the views.py. Okay, so moels. All right. Right here. So we need to change this to models, not moels, on line number 2. Okay. And now we have a name error. I'm not sure if that's the same error. Yes, it's a different one. Name froms. See, this is what happens, guys, when you type fast. Let's change this. I'm not sure where froms is coming from. So this is what page? This is the forms.py. So let's open up forms.py. Forms.py. Okay, from forms. Let's look for froms. There we go. Yeah, see right here. This is right here. So let's change that to forms, not froms. All right, so if I save that, okay, it looks like we're good there. So now let's flip back to the browser. All right, and let me just do another refresh. It looks like we have another error message, so template syntax issue, okay? So this is part of the name of the game, folks, just troubleshooting till we get this working. So, should have at least. Okay, yeah, that's because we haven't finished it. That's right, we haven't finished it. All right, so we actually have not finished our view. Let's go back to our view. Since we've already finished this views function, now we have to go back to our HTML. So let's go back to our to-do-list.html because, guys, remember we were supposed to finish this, but we couldn't finish it until we defined our model. So now we're back where we left off. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to be able to bring in the models. Now, as you saw, let me just kind of backtrack for 1 second because this is very important. Let's go back to views.py. I want to show you folks something. This is very important. So as you know, on this line here, line 6, we're fetching a list of all to-do tasks. And then we're now passing that as a variable called to-dos to the view, to this to-do list HTML view, right? Now, how do we access that from the view? So if I go back to to-do list HTML, how do I access that? It's just simply referencing the variable name, right? So in this for loop, we're going to say for each task, so for task in to-dos, because that to-dos list is being passed from the view.py, the views.py function that we just completed. All right, so let me just open this up here. So now we should have access to that data directly, and that's the importance of passing values to the view, right? Directly from the views.py folder, because it's the controller whose main responsibility is to serve up these values directly to the view so that it's accessible. All right, so now we have access to that. This creates some more HTML here for styling reasons. So we're going to define a paragraph, and we're going to give that a class of to-do-item. And then open and close that. All right, and in here, what I'm going to do here is let's define a new A tag. And should I give this a class? Let's just define the href for now. And that href will be URL again, because we're not going to hard code a URL. We're going to use Django template tags here. And we're going to call this task_detail, which we have not created yet. Because what we're going to do is we're going to create a detail page as well, so that if the user clicks on a title, they'll be able to be redirected to the detail page. Now, one thing I want to do is let me finish writing this here. Let me just close that up and add the closing tag here. And I'm trying to think if I need something else like a class here. Let's add an alt tag, right? It's a good practice. And for the alt tag, what I'll do is I'll add the title. Now, I haven't shown you guys this yet, but let's say we want to output a value, okay? We can't use the curly braces percentage sign for outputting. That's just for like creating blocks or references, right? What we need to do is we need to use double curly braces like this, and this represents outputting a value. So what we want to output as the alt text to this is task.title, right? So we're just going to use the title of the to-do as the title, as the alt tag value. All right, it's just good for people with accessibility issues, right? All right, and then lastly, we're going to do actually the same thing here as the actual output of the link text. We're going to say task.title, like that. All right. So I think this is good. Now, what I'm going to do here is, let me just kind of backtrack here to this task_detail. So let's go ahead and, first, before I go further into this, let's go ahead and create this route, because we don't have a route for this yet. So again, wherever we use this URL, we need to make sure we have a route that's linked to this. So let's go back to our urls.py of the to-do list right here, not the project one, but the to-do list urls.py. And I'm going to create a new one. I'm just going to copy this one, and I'm going to come down here and paste this one in. And I'm going to create a new one. Now, generally what we need to do here is we need to create one that will accept a specific primary key value in the URL, right? And the reason why we want to do that is because we need to know the specific record that we need to render, okay? So we need to know that. So what I'm going to do here is, to make things simple, I'm going to name this route task like that, / and I'm going to open up a set of greater than, less than, and greater than brackets. And then within these brackets, I'm going to type int for integer, colon, and then pk. Exactly like this. It must match this exactly, guys, for this to work, okay? So what am I doing here? When the user goes to abc123.com/task / let's say an ID of 1, they're going to get redirected to this route here because we're passing an ID, okay? A record ID from the database. This is the to-do list item ID. If we don't pass an ID, the user will going to get an error message, like a 404 not found message. So, it's important to pass this ID. So that's why we're making this a required parameter to this URL. Okay. And this is exactly how you pass this in. Now this int just means integer, and that represents a number. If we were passing a string instead of an integer, we would say str colon, and then whatever the string is, for example, slug, if we had like slugs for each and every record. But in this case, we're working with a numeric ID. So we're just going to label this as int colon pk. Now, lastly, what we need to do here, two more things. We need to say that this is linked to views.task_detail, because we want to link it to that specific function in views.py. And then lastly, we need to just rename this here to task_detail, which is the which is the same value. If I go back to the to-do list HTML, it's the same exact value that we see here, this task_detail. Now, because this route here, this URL is expecting a primary key, as you can see here, so far all we have here is just the URL, but we don't have the primary key. We need to pass the primary key into this. So to do that, all we need to do is just add another space here and type pk is equal to whatever the primary key is. So we get that from task.pk, and that's going to pass in the primary key of this record. So that way the user gets redirected to the correct record based on that ID. All right. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it, folks. Don't feel nervous about this at all. Right, so yep, I think we're good there. Let me just double check here. So one thing I want to do is, I know we have to create this file as well. We have to create this task detail file. So let's go ahead and do that. We have to create that template. So let's go back to templates. Where are you, templates? Whenever I can't find something so easily, let's just type in a template that I know of. This is a little side trick. All right, so notice that like it's highlighting this template right now. Well, now I know the templates file is right here, right above it. Because the downfall of like Django projects is that it usually creates like multiple folders of the same name. As you saw earlier, we had a project folder called Django_crash, and then we had another folder within it called the same name. So I just find it easier to use the command P to just navigate quickly, as well as that little trick whenever I can't find the parent folder of a particular file. All right, so let's create this file here, and we're going to call this task-detail.html. All right, now to save some time on this, for this detail page, Let's open up to-do list HTML again, and I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to go back to task-detail and paste this in, because it's essentially, there's going to be some changes to this, but it's going to be rather similar in nature. Now, what we want to do for this, obviously, hence the name, we just want to render the details of a specific task. So we're just going to render like the task title, description, and whether the task has been completed or not. Okay, generally that's all we want to do. So let me see here. I'm not sure what's going on. All right, so what I want to do here, let's make some edits to this page. The first thing I'm going to do is, as you know, we're extending the base HTML, so we can leave that as is. And this block we can leave as is as well. We're just going to change this. So instead of passing in to do home, this is going to be a dynamic value that we're passing in. So again, we're going to need those double curly braces here, like that. And in here, we're going to pass task.title. Okay. And again, we haven't finished this method yet, but we're going to come back later and finish the method, and so that task can be available to this view. All right, so now we're going to have our block content. And by the way, about block content really quickly, let's go back to base HTML in case you guys are wondering where that's coming from. Down here, you guys can see we have this block content right here. This is where the actual the child pages are being rendered here within this main div. So going back again to task-detail, you guys can see we also have it here, this block content. So anything that's within this is going to get rendered to the base HTML template. Okay, so what do we want to do here? We can leave the to-dos headings as is. We just want to change some of this up. So I'm going to get rid of this H1 text. And in here, I'm going to say task.title as well. We just want to render out the title here. And let's see, what else do we want? Actually, you know what? We can get rid of, let's get rid of, I can get rid of quite a bit of this, actually. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of, let's get rid of this, all of this. I'm going to get rid of everything up to the H1, okay? So that's leaving, so because we're going to write out quite a bit here. So what we need to do next is we're going to display like a badge that's going to show whether a task is completed or not, okay? So to do that, I'm going to use an if block. And here we have this if template tag. And we're going to say if completed, because remember, completed, actually it should be task.completed. Remember, this completed is a Boolean value. It's either true or false, which means that if it is true, then we need to output the badge. Otherwise, we output nothing. So within this block, I'm going to add a span. And for the span, I'm going to say class is equal to badge, because we have special styling for this badge. I'm just going to close this out like that. And let's just open up this block. Now for the span, I'm going to add first one of my font awesome icons, which is just going to be a checkbox, and that's going to be I class is equal to FAS. And this is all part of Font Awesome, guys, so you can check out the documentation online, FA-check. And close this out like that. So that's going to be the icon, the check mark icon. And then lastly, right after that, we're just going to say task completed. Okay? Or task complete sounds better. Okay? Task complete. All right. And now after that, we're going to end the if block. So I think that's good to go. Just double checking here. Let's see, what else do we want here? Let's add also, yeah, we need to also output our description. I almost forgot. So let's do that. We're going to have a p tag, and we're going to say task.description, like that. I don't think we need any styling on this. That should be fine. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an href or an anchor tag, a link that goes back to the home page the list of the to-do list page. All right, so in here, I'm going to have an href, and again, we're not going to hard code the home page. What we're going to do is we're going to use that URL directive here, and we're going to pass in here to-do_list, and again, that value comes from our urls.py name attribute. Okay, so we're just going to close this out like this, and in here, we're going to say back to home like that. All right, I think that's good enough. All right, so that should be the to do the task detail. Just thinking, yep, I think that should be it for that. Let's see if we can get something to render. Actually, before we do that, let's go back to our views.py. So we need to complete this function in order for all of this to work, right? This task detail function. So far, we've only completed to-do lists, so now let's work on task detail. Now, this task detail function, as you recall, we're passing in the primary key, which is the record ID, to this function to make this work. So now what we need to do is we need to work with that ID to fetch the corresponding record and then pass that into the view so we can have access to its data. Okay, so let's do that. First, let's fetch the task. We're going to say task is equal to, now we're going to use our get object or 404 function that we brought in above. And the way that this works is first we pass it the model name. So we also brought this in, the to-do item, that's the name of the model. And then we're going to pass in the primary key. That's it. So it's going to be pk is equal to pk, the pk that we're passing in up here on the line above. All right, so now just that little bit of code should fetch the correct task. Lastly here, it's just 2 lines, essentially, 2 lines of code. We're going to return a render, and we're going to say request, as always, but this time we want to return the task-detail.html file. And we want to pass the task object so that the way we can have access to the data. So we're going to pass that in as task as we've used in our template, because that name has to match. Basically, this string has to match the name of the variable that we're using in our for loop, or rather in our variable in the template. All right, so that should work. So let me just give that a save. I think that might be done. Let's try it, because you never know. Let's go to our browser, and I'm going to just refresh, and there we go. So now we're seeing some input or output finally. So we're seeing the UI, and you guys can see right here, we're actually rendering out the very first task because we manually entered this one, if you recall, right? So now the first thing I'll try here is I'll just try to click on this and see if I get redirected to the task detail page. So if I click on that, you guys can see that I'm seeing the task detail now. So this is working exactly as we expected. So it says buy bananas, and then it shows the task description. Now if I click on, go back to home, where are you? Right here, it takes me back to the home page. All right, so far so good. All right, now if I click on this add new task button, we're going to get an error message because we haven't defined anything yet. So before we do that, what we need to do is we need to work a bit on we need to work a little bit more on this file here, this to-do list file, because we still need to add a couple of more things here before we move on. I just wanted to take care of task detail really quickly. So let's close out of a lot of these here. Let me just close all of these tabs. And I'm just going to open up the to-do list HTML again. Okay. All right. So we've done this part so far. Now what we need to do, and I think that what we need to do is we need to add the capabilities of editing and deleting a task directly from the list just to make it user friendly. All right. So I'm trying to think of the best place to put this. So far we have this for loop. We're looping through every single task and we're outputting just the title, okay? So what we need to do now is let's add, I think the best way to handle this is to add another span tag. So that way this will fall in line. Let's just do that. Let's add a span, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a span that includes the edit and delete links within this. So let's just add a span tag, and you see what I'm talking about. We're going to set the spans class to actions, which is part of our styling in our style.css class. We're just going to say span. I'm just going to hit enter on that. Now we're going to add the first link, so ahref, and again, we don't want to hard code it. We want to point to the edit task page and the delete task page respectively. So let's do edit task first. So we're going to say URL, hit enter. So it should look like this, and we're going to have a URL name that's going to say edit task. And we're going to close this out like that, and we're just going to say edit here. All right. Now, this edit task will also take in a primary key. So we're going to say pk is equal to, and we need to pass in task.pk. Okay, and I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to do the same for delete or something similar. Ahref, we're going to say, instead of edit underscore task, we're going to say delete underscore task. And here we're going to pass in the primary key, and instead of edit here, we're going to say delete. There we go. All right. All right, so I think that will be it for this file's markup. I think that should work, all right, for the markup. Now what we need to do is define these routes, because we're using these URL keywords here. So let's go ahead and let's define routes for this. Back to urls.py of to-do list, and let's define the route. So we've let me just comment out add for now. Actually, we've already added that, so I'll uncomment that for now. Let's go ahead and add. We'll copy add. Let's copy it and paste it 2 more times. So this one's going to be edit. And we're going to say edit, and we're going to do int pk like that. And this is going to point to views.edit task, and that's going to be a name of edit task, which is very important so that the view knows exactly how to do a reverse lookup on this. And then lastly, we're going to have the last one say delete /int :pk and views.delete, and this is going to be delete. All right. Okay, should be good. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to switch the order of this and put this one at the bottom. Sometimes the order matters, so you just got to be careful in what order you define these routes. Because, for example, if you defined a route that just only took in a primary key, for example, like this, let's just say it only took in this, it didn't have like a prefixed route name. If you're not careful, especially in the case of it being a string, let's say if it was string, str, if you're not careful and you, depending on the order of it, if you try to go to add, like in this case, you would get an error message because it wouldn't find a string of add, or it may not find, if it doesn't exist, a string of add in your database. So you need to make sure you're careful with the order of how you define these routes and what order you're defining them. So what I generally like to do here is I generally like to, anything that's taking in a parameter in a URL, I generally like to put those last and put the ones that are taking in no parameters at the top. But again, it's on a case-by-case basis. All right, so I think we're completely done with the urls.py file. I'm going to close this out. We may have to come back to it later to make some adjustments if we have any error messages. All right, so the next thing I want to do, let's go to our views.py. So views.py here, and let's start working on both edit and delete. We'll work on both of them at the same time to save some time here. So For the edit, as you can see, we're taking in a primary key. So what we need to do here is we need to be able to work with that primary key to fetch the record from the database, and then we need to allow the user to make an edit. Now, obviously, for this, we're going to be working with our form. In fact, you know what? Let's come back to this. Let's work on add first, because the add logic will be based on, the edit logic will be based on add to some degree. All right, so let's work on adding a new task first. So as you know, if I were to, let's go back to our UI so I can show you guys. If I were to click on this button, I think we would still have the error message, right? Okay, something's broken. Indentation, expected, on line 16. Views.py. Line 19 is saying, that's weird. So expected in line 16. Expected indentation. It is indented. Let's save it again. That's weird. Okay, yeah. So we're still getting a value error message, which is coming here. So what we need to do, because it's basically giving us the message because of the add task. It didn't return a, okay, yeah, that's because we haven't even defined it. All right, so what we're gonna do is let's create our next template, which is our define task, our add task. Let's take care of the template first, and then we come back and do the view. So let's go to templates, and let's create a new one called add task. I'm gonna come up here and new file, add-task.html. And for this one, let's just go to task detail again. I'm just going to copy this from task detail.html. Let's go back to add task and paste it in. All right, so for now, for this one here, this is going to be a brand new task. All right, so the user will complete the form and create a brand new task in the database. So there's a few things we'll need to change here. So the very first line, as you already know, we're going to leave that as is. But what we're going to do is we're going to change this line here. Let's get rid of this code here. We're just going to leave the blocks. But in here, we're going to replace that with add task. This is going to be, and by the way, guys, if you don't know exactly where this is shown, this is actually shown in the tab of our browser. At the very top of our browser, this is normally shown in the tab area. Okay, so the block content will remain the same. Block content. You know what? Let's get rid of this. Let's type this fresh so that way it's easy to understand. You know what? I'll get rid of everything except the link at the bottom, because I think I'll leave that link. Or I'll make it say something different. We'll see. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the H1, and this is going to be, let's just say add task. All right, so that's the H1. Next up, what we're going to do is create a form, and we're going to have the method of post, because we want to be able to do a post request to our server side to handle this form submission. Okay, so then we're going to set an action, and this is an interesting part, guys, so please pay attention. Let's just first go ahead and close out this form like that. Let's just hit enter there. Okay, so for the action, let's make sure it's spelled correctly, A-C-T-I-O-N. So for the action, if you guys know like basic HTML, you'll know that the action is normally the URL to which you would post this request. So for example, if you wanted to go to like a success page, you would do like /success normally, right? But again, in Django, we don't do it like that. We use the URL keyword. So we say, for example, we do URL and hit enter, and instead we post this directly to a URL that we define in our urls.py. In this case, we're going to have it post to add_task, which again, if I go back to urls.py, I definitely want to drill this in, folks, so please bear with me here. So this name right here, you need to make sure that this name right here of this route, okay, which points to the add page, okay, you need to make sure that that equals add task. You want to make sure that it equals this here. And if you have any parameters to pass, you would pass it in as second arguments. All right, so now this is pointing to the correct place. Now, whenever we're working with forms in Django, we need to make sure the very first thing we add is a CSRF, our cross-site reference token. So we're going to say CSRF token and hit enter. CSRF underscore token within template tags. And what this does is it prevents cross-site scripting on our website with form submissions. So users won't easily be able to inject any kind of information or steal any kind of information during the form request or the form processing rather request. So yeah, this is important. Otherwise, it won't work. All right. So the next thing we want here is we want a div. And we'll close that out. All right. So we're going to give some styling to this. We're going to say div class, and we're going to give it the styling of form dash control. I think I just have like one style on there, form control. Okay. Now we're going to give it a label. We're going to say label 4, and we're going to give it an ID. We're going to say ID. Now, I don't necessarily need to do this, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So label 4 ID underscore title. And then we're going to say the first label is title, and then we're going to give it a closing label like this. Now, I want to point out something after I do this. Let me just do this next part here. So the next part I'm going to do is, if you guys recall, we needed to be able to pass a form instance into this view, so that way we can render the form, which is definitely coming from our forms.py file. Because again, in our forms.py, if I go back to that, forms.py, we've set up these widgets, right? Now these widgets are the actual visual components that will render directly to the page. So when we set up our views.py function in a second, basically we need to pass an instance of form to make this work, to render the form. So let's go back and finish our markup before we go to views.py. Let's go back to add task. Okay, so in here to render this particular element, once we pass in the form variable, it's just going to be form.title. That's it. Because again, this is going to work because we're binding the forms.py's fields to the models.py's fields. So that is basically data bound fields, or data binding is essentially. Now, you may be asking, well, what's this for equals? So this for attribute on label allows us to create a direct link to the ID field of the title, right? So whenever the user clicks on this label, then their cursor will be automatically focused on the input, right? The linked input in this case, which would be title. That's the reason why we're doing this here. Now, there is another way we can render forms. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but for instance, if we were not using widgets, we could also do here form.asp or as paragraph. But because I'm using widgets for this because I want to be able to style the labels and have a little bit more flexibility here. So that's the reason why I'm taking this approach, but there's more than one way to handle forms in Django, okay? All right, so let's move on to the next part here. So we've defined the first. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this entire form control and paste it again. And what I'll do here, let's see, we're also going to define a label here, but we're going to change this here. Let's change this for to ID underscore description. Now let's change this label itself to description. And we're going to just do here form.description. Now, if you guys notice, I don't have to actually write out, text area or input. I don't have to do this because it's actually defined as a widget in the forms.py file. So everything is defined by code, not by markup. Okay. All right, lastly, I'm going to add one more of these. I'm just going to paste it one more time. And this one's going to be a little different. We're going to just say here ID, let's see, I'm going to say ID underscore completed. And that's going to be, let's say task completed with a question mark. And that's going to be here form.completed, right? I think that's what we called it, completed. All right, that's going to render out the checkbox. All right, now obviously with a form you need to have a submission button. Okay, so let's put a button below. So after this last div, we're just going to add a button. I'm just going to close this out like that. I think I spelled that correctly. And this one's just going to be, the label for this button is just going to be add task. All right, so I think we need to add some style here. So the style I created for this is btn-submit. That's just for our submit button. And also we need to have a type on this so that way Django will identify this as being a file submission or form submission. Type is equal to submit. All right. I think that should be it for that. And lastly, like I said, I'm going to have this link here, and I want this to point to. Actually, you know what? I don't need this at all here. Actually, you know what? I will keep it. You know why? Because if the user decides not to submit something, I want to keep a link back to the home page so we don't have to change anything here. We can just leave this as is. Okay, I think this should do it here. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. Lastly, let's go to our views.py. And we're going to need to work with this add task function. So generally, very high level before I delve a bit deeper into this, this is the workflow. So the first thing you'll need to do is obviously set up your urls.py files or routes rather, and then you would set up your views, and then you would set up your HTML and have pass in any kind of object references or any other data types that you need to pass in and to directly render out data and so on. So this is essentially the workflow. urls.py, views.py, and then the actual template. Okay. All right. So let's see. What do we want to do here? So I think for add task, we need to be able to first handle the form submission. So as you can see, we're not passing in a private key or a primary key rather, because this is a brand new record. We wouldn't have an ID, right? So the first thing we need to do is handle the form request that comes in. Now, if you recall, we set the method to post. So we need to check if the method of this request is a post. So we're going to say if request.method is equal to post, sorry, only two equal signs, is equal to post, we need to do something, right? So what we need to do is we need to instantiate a new form object. So we're going to say form is equal to to-do form. And in this, we're going to pass in the post method. So we're going to say request.post, right? And this is going to automatically instantiate a brand new form object for us and bind the data that's within the post to that form, okay? Next up, we're going to then check to see if the form is valid, right? So are we submitting valid data? So if form is valid, colon. Now, if the form is valid, what we want to do is save the data that's on the form. So we're going to say form.save. And then lastly, we just want to return a redirect. And for this redirect, we want to go back to the to-do list. So we're going to say to-do underscore list. That's it. So basically, this is saying if we submit the form and it's successful, just return back to the to-do list. Now, in a production environment, you may want to have some sort of notification here to say, save successful or, new task created successfully, whatever you want to output here. But for brevity here, I'm not going to include that logic, okay? Let's see. Now we need to handle the else. So what happens if this is not a post? So let's make sure our cursor is aligned with this if. This is very tricky here. But let's make sure this is aligned, because in Python, it's very unforgiving. So we're going to type here else. So if this is like a GET request or anything else other than a POST request, excuse me, what we need to do is instantiate a new form. So we're going to say form, and we're just going to instantiate a blank form, because we just want to render the form to the page with no data included. All right, so that should be it for that. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to return, and this return will get hit if it's not a post request, okay? Just to point this out. So we want to return render. So basically on the very first page load, we're going to render the request, and we're going to redirect the user to add-task.html, and we do need to pass in the form. So we're going to say form here, and we're going to pass in the form. So that's going to give us our form, and now that's going to be accessible to the view. Okay, I think that should work. Let's go back and test this. All right, so if I were to refresh this, and again, we're going to just give this a shot, and there we go. We have our form here, and it looks like it's rendering out, and we misspelled add, so let's go back and fix that. Let's go back to our add task HTML, and in our H1 above, let's go up here. Yeah, so we misspelled add right here, so we're just going to say 2Ds add. Here we go. And now if I refresh this, now you guys will see it's fixed. So add task. So this is going to allow us to add a task, and you see we have our form rendering with our placeholders here. So let's try to add a task. Let's say get oil change, and we're going to say my car needs an oil change. It is 6 months overdue. All right. Now for this one, I'm going to select task completed. So I've already got my oil change. Let's check that box. And if I hit add task, it'll redirect me back to the home page. And right here, we see that we have the new task. And we also have the old one here, the buy bananas, but we also now have get oil change. So if I click on that, now we see that we got the detail page, which is showing the title of get oil change. And now we have the description here. And we also have this badge rendering because we marked the task as complete. So this is working perfectly. We're on a good track here. So let's go back to home. One other thing I wanted to test here is if I click on add new task again, let's say if I change my mind and I don't want to add a task, if I click on back to home here, let's make sure that works, and it does work. Beautiful. All right, so the last things remaining here would be the edit and delete functionality. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so let's close a few things here. We're gonna close let's close task detail. We can reopen some of these if we need to. urls.py, I think we're good here. We don't really need this anymore. I'll close it. And let's see, forms, we don't need that. Close it, add task. We may need add task. I'm gonna leave this one open, all right? All right, so what we're gonna do, let's go ahead and create the last two HTML files here as part of our template. So let's finish the markup first, and then we'll finish the views.py thereafter. All right, so now I'm gonna create two more files. So I'm just gonna click here. So another thing with this trick, you can either click on the HTML file itself, or you can click on the folder to create a new file. It's gonna land in the right place. So if I click on this, you guys can see it lands in the same folder. So we're gonna type here edit-task.html, and I'll just go ahead and I'll create the other one as well while we're here. We'll create delete-task.html as well. All right, so let's close delete for now. Let's work on edit. Okay, so I'm gonna copy all of add task, and I'm gonna close add task, and I'm gonna go back to edit, and I'm gonna paste that in like this. Okay. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna work on a page where we're gonna basically render the form, and the form will be pre-populated with the given data. So basically, if I flip back to views.py, my mouse pointer is acting up right now, sorry. If I flip back to views.py, then basically in views.py, you guys will see right here, you guys will see that it takes in a primary key, which is the record ID. Now, with that primary key, similarly as we did to the task detail, we would look up the corresponding record. And because we'll have access to that record, we'll also have access to the data. And then we can pre-populate the fields of that form with the data. This is very easy to do in Django. In fact, it's not much work at all. So let's go ahead and make some edits to this template. Let's see, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave the top level base HTML import or extension as is. Let's go ahead and let's make it known to the user this is an edit page. So in our block title up top, I'm going to get rid of this add task, and I'm going to type in here edit, and then I'm going to use the double squigglies, and I'm going to type in here task.title. So it's going to basically in a tab is going to say edit, buy bananas, for example. So that way the user knows that they're editing. So I think what we'll do first here is we have this H1. Let's go ahead and make this even more obvious. We're going to take this text out and say edit, double quotes, and then double squigglies, and we're going to say task.title. So edit whatever the task name is, or task title. Next, we're going to have the same form. I think a lot of this will be the same. But instead here, instead of add task, we're going to change this to edit task, which we've defined in our urls.py as the name attribute. And now we have to pass in the primary key. So we're going to say pk is equal to task.pk. Because we have to pass that primary key in so we can look up this record directly. CSRF token can remain. I think a lot of this will be the same because it's essentially the form. Let's see. Let's look through here. Just doing a quick look through here. Yeah, I think the form will be the same. And in a real world scenario, you might want to find a way to because the form is exactly the same. A great idea normally would be to maybe add this form as a separate partial view because we could reuse it in two places. But for brevity, I'm not going to do that here because this video has gotten a bit long, so I don't want to go too deep into that right now. But that could be a great homework assignment for you guys. All right, so let's see here. Well, all we want to edit here is we want to change this add task to update task for the button, and it's a submit button. I think this is good to go, and we can leave this link as is. I mean, there weren't many changes at all here. All right. All right, I think that's good there. So let's go to our views.py. All right, now we want to work with the edit task. So a lot of this will be very simple, actually. Now, in other programming languages, handling edits are usually a little bit time-consuming in other languages versus doing add. Add is usually the easiest because you're dealing with new data. You don't have to worry about handling IDs and things like that. But with edit, sometimes it takes a lot longer. But in Django, they make it very simple to edit data and to display existing data within the form. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So here, I'm just going to get rid of this pass. First, we're going to fetch the record by its primary key. We're going to say task is equal to the get object, or 404, we're going to pass into do item, and we're going to say pk is equal to pk. This is basically the primary key we're passing in, the ID. Next, we're going to check to see if this is a post request. So we're going to say if request.method is equal to post. So if this is a form submission, essentially, what we want to do is we're going to instantiate the form. So it's very similar to the add. To do form, we're going to pass in request.post. But what's going to differ here is we're going to have a second argument where we're setting an instance of task. And the reason why we're doing that is this is the code right here. Just this part right here will automatically populate the data into the fields. And why is because it's data binding. So basically the forms.py file has a direct link to the data model. So by us specifying the instance, which we're fetching from the database and passing this in, the form will automatically be populated with the most up-to-date values from the database, which is pretty neat. Otherwise, in other languages, we would have to manually do that part. So this is one thing that makes Django awesome. Next, we're going to do a check to see if this data is valid. We still have to check that, if this form submission is valid and if the form is valid. If it is valid, we're going to save, and then we're going to return a redirect. And what we're going to return to is, let's return to the actual, if everything goes well, let's return to the detail page instead. So we're going to say task_detail. But what we have to do here is we have to pass in the primary key, because remember, the task detail page depends on the primary key. So we need to say pk is equal to task.pk, or you can say pk is equal to pk because it's above, but I'm going to say task.pk just for, legibility here. Okay, and again, the reason why we have to pass this primary key is because our function call above for task detail requires a primary key. It's part of the route, if you guys recall. All right, so that should be it for that case. But now we need to handle the else scenario. So if it is not a post request, what do we do? So we're going to say else, and we're going to do the same thing where we're going to instantiate a new form. And we're going to call this to-do form. And we're going to say instance, again, is equal to task. And again, we still have to do that because it is an edit form, right? So we still need to pre-populate the data if it's not a post request, okay? All right, so lastly, we're gonna say return. We're gonna return let's say return render. What are we gonna do here? We're gonna pass in a request. Let's return right back to the same page. If all else fails, we're just gonna return back to the edit-task.html : and then we're going to pass the same form back. So we're going to say form and form like that. Now that I think about it, we also have to pass the task, right? So let's also pass the task. We can also pass more than one set of arguments here. So we're going to say task is equal to task. So we're passing both the form and the task to the view on the very first page load. Right? And I think that should do it for edit, I think. All right, so let's go back here. I'm just going to do a refresh here. You should always refresh after these major changes. Cool. So let's see, which one do we want to edit? Let's go ahead and edit the buy bananas. I'll edit that. Okay, we have an error message here. Let's go here to see what it says. To-do list, item views, didn't return a HTTP response. Okay, return none. That might be tricky. Let's see. Return redirect. Okay, so weird. Return redirect task detail. Now, so what we did, let me just backtrack here. So all we did is we clicked the edit link, right? So generally it won't be a post request because we clicked the edit link. It should be a GET request because we're just redirecting. So at some point, there's a problem here. It can either be a problem here or something else above. Request PK. Just double checking here, tracing through things. So I think return render, request edit dash task .html form. So it's not returning that. Scroll up here. Let's look from the very top. Let's reverse engineer this. So we're getting the task with the 404. We're passing in the primary key to get the task. And in the case of, okay, I know what the problem is. So again, this is the importance of, guys, this is the importance of indentation. Look right here. So the problem here is that on line 31, we have this if statement, but this else statement should not apply to this if. This else should apply to the outer if. So we need to move this over like this. Like this. This is correct now. This should work. So now if I save, let me just go back and refresh here. All right, now if I click on edit, now we see our form. Okay, so guys, again, make sure that the indentation is correct. I make that mistake from every now and then because I don't have the luxury of curly braces in Python. So that's the reason why this mistake happens. But let's go back. And if you guys notice, we're getting the pre-populated data back in our model. We're getting back the title, the description, the checkbox, and so on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make an edit to this, and I want to make sure that that edit gets stored in the database successfully. So instead of buy bananas, I'm going to change this to buy a new pair of shoes, and then we'll just say I love boots, whatever. May not be the best thing to say here, but all right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click update task. And as you guys can see here, this worked because now it's updated by a new pair of shoes, right? It basically replaced buy bananas with buy a new pair of shoes, and then it updated the description. So now if I click to go back to home, you see also on the home page it updated. So I'm going to click edit one more time, and all I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark this as complete. Let's imagine I bought those new pair of shoes now. And if I click save, now you see that it's set this as task completed. Is displaying the badge, and if I go back to the home page, nothing else changed. Everything looks good. So edit is working, guys. So now, so far we've got most of our CRUD model working. We've got create working, which is the add functionality. We have read working. The R in CRUD is read, which is the to-do list and the detail page. The U in CRUD is working, which is update, which is the edit page. Now we have to get the D, which is delete working, because right now, if you click on this link, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. All right, so for delete, what we are going to do is we've already opened or created our file, our delete file. Let's go ahead. What we're going to do for delete is let's create a brand new page for delete. I don't want to use JavaScript. You know, one easy way is just to use JavaScript to handle that by using like an on-click event and then making a call to the endpoint or to the action. But I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to just use straight Django in this case. So let's see, what can we do here? Let's leave this views.py open, and to-do list, we can close that, because essentially what I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, let's open up add task.html. Let's go to that, and in the add task, I'm just going to copy everything here, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up delete task, and I'm going to paste everything in. Now, this should be rather simple to do, but let's go through it line by line here. So again, we're going to leave the base HTML as is. Let's replace this right here, this add task, with delete. And let's use double squigglies again because we're going to output task.title. Yep. And a question mark. Actually, you know what? Let's get rid of the question mark. It doesn't need to be there. I'll put a question mark down here. All right, so here we're going to do delete as the H1, delete, and double squigglies, task.title. And you know what? I'm going to surround these with double quotes like this. Like this, and then a question mark. So delete, buy bananas, for example, right? So it's evident what we're trying to do here to the user. All right, so what I'm gonna do, you know what? Let's get rid of everything. We don't really need all this. I'm gonna make it simpler. So I'm gonna get rid of the form completely. We just have the H1 right now. Let's add a paragraph tag. And in this paragraph tag, we're going to ask the question, are you sure you want to delete this task? Right? Just to kind of like give them some additional help text there. Now we'll create a new form. I'm going to close this out like this right now. Not sure what happened there. Now for this form, we're not going to have a forms.py file, guys. Because this is going to be a basic form and it's not really going to be directly bound to any data. We're just going to be using it to just handle the form submission in itself. We're not going to have like any input fields or anything like that, just a simple submission button. All right, so the first thing here we're going to do is let's set, not a class, let's set a method of post, just like the others. So method is equal to post, because we're going to do a post request here. And then we're going to do an action. And for the action, again, we're going to use that URL template tag. And we're going to point that to delete underscore task, which is defined in our urls.py. And then we're going to pass in the primary key. And that's going to be equal to task.pk. All right. Same like the other files. Okay, so let's see, what do we want to do here? Let's add our CSRF token as always, because we are using a form here. And I think what we'll do here is let's add a div. And in this div, let's close that out like that. In this div, we're going to have a class, and this class will be one of my styles. Let's see, which one do I want to use here? Let's say action, or actions rather. Okay. Now, what I want to show here are two buttons, or essentially one button and one link. The button will be red, a red danger button, and it's basically going to be, yes, I want to delete or something like that. And then the link will be the cancel button to exit out of the view and to do nothing. So let's first handle the confirmation button, which will be the red danger button, or the red delete button, if you will. So let's say button. Let's close this out, button. All right, so for this button, we're gonna say class, and the class will be btn-danger. And this is a custom class I defined. This is not part of like some sort of style library or anything like that. So for the text, I'm gonna say yes, delete now, okay? And I'm trying to think here. What I can add here is I can add a button type of submit. Say type is equal to submit. And then lastly, we're going to have a ahref, and this is going to point to URL. So when the user cancels out of this, let's send them back to the home page where the to-do list is. And let's just do an A, close an A. We're just going to say cancel here. Okay, I think that should work. Yeah, I think that should be fine. Yes, delete now. Okay. All right, so now the view should be done. So now let's go to our views.py, and we're going to go down to our delete method. And this is the final function that we have to deal with here, the final Python function. Now, again, as you guys can see, we are passing in a primary key, okay? So what we need to do here is we need to fetch the record using that ID. So it's essentially the same thing, guys. Like, the good thing about a lot of these CRUD operations is that you don't necessarily have to do anything different, majorly different between functions. There will be some nuances, but a lot of it is still the same. We're going to say task here is equal to get underscore object or 404, and we're going to pass in the model name, and then we're going to say pk is equal to pk. That's going to get us our task, our target task. And again, we're going to say if request.method is equal to post. Then first we're going to, in this case, we just want to delete the task, right? We don't have an actual form to instantiate, so we're just going to say task.delete. So again, we don't have to run a special SQL query to delete. Like, we don't have to do delete from table where whatever. We could just say task.delete, which is part of our ORM package, our object relational mapper that's built into Django, which allows us to just run these database queries on the fly. So then all we're going to do is we're going to return here the redirect, and we want to redirect the user back to the home page, which is the to-do list. Okay, so then once the record is deleted, it's going to just force the user to go back to the home page. Lastly, if it is not, then we're going to return a, let's return a render, not a redirect, a render. Now you may be asking, I should have covered this earlier, but what's the difference between redirect and render? Well, redirect, again, usually happens as part of a form submission process. And generally you would use a redirect if you don't necessarily want to have a certain page's data or a page easily accessible to a user. You would use the redirect to do a hard redirect, and then it basically handles the browser history differently than if you use a render. If you use a render, the user can click back and easily access that page again. So generally with form submissions and things like that, to avoid brute force attacks and various other types of hacking strategies, you would generally use like a redirect. It just kind of minimizes, it doesn't fully protect against it, but it kind of minimizes the amount of brute force attacks that could happen. All right, so we have a render here. What I'm going to do is first, as always, let me just get rid of that. We're just going to pass in the request as the very first argument, and then we're going to specify delete-task.html. And then lastly, here, we're not passing a form because there is really, the form that we created is just to handle the form submission based on the button click. If we didn't use that form, by the way, guys, in the view, like if we didn't use the form that was in the delete task view here, if we didn't use this form tag and the method and the action attributes, then we would have to use JavaScript to submit this form, asynchronous JavaScript to submit this. And again, I want to avoid that. That's the reason why I'm wrapping the button in the form element. All right, so let's go back to views to finish this up. Okay. So we're going to pass in here a task because we need to have access to the task. That's pretty much it. All right. I think that should be it. All right, let's test this. So if I go back to the browser, And let's just give it a nice good old refresh. All right, so far we have two tasks or to-do items here. So let's click one of them, okay? And it's asking to delete now, but there's a problem. This button is not red, and it should be red, and it's also a problem, I believe, with some of the styles. So let's go back here and see what the problem is. Let's go back to this. I just want to double check what the problem is, because that should not be the case. Okay, let's go back to our delete task HTML. Trying to think what could be the issue here. So we have our actions, type submit, class, btn, danger. Awkward here. Let's see. Okay, I think I might be missing a class on the form. Let's define a class here. Let's say class is equal to delete-form on the form element. Let's go back to our browser, and if I refresh, there we go. Now that's the correct styling, guys. Okay, so we were just missing that the class on the form. So make sure you add delete-form on the form element itself. I was just missing that. All right. Okay, so now this is working. This view is working. It's asking us to delete this particular task here. So first, before I do that, I'm just going to click on cancel here to go back. There we go. Now, one thing I did notice, so we still have the two tasks here. So it didn't delete anything. So let's go back. One thing I did notice is that I still have this link here. So let's get rid of that, because there's no need to have two of them, because the cancel link already does that work. So let's just get rid of this right here, this A link right here. All right, save. And now if I go back and refresh, that's gone. All right. So, okay, so the cancel link works. So lastly, we just need to test the delete. So let's click on that. And now you guys can see there's just one left. All right. And now if I click delete again, now we have this last one. And if I click yes, delete now, it's gone. Now if I click on add task, let's test the entire thing end to end. All right, so let's add a new task. Let's just call this task 1 and just say this is task 1, and we'll just save this as this. Okay, cool. So we've added task 1. If I click on it, I can see the details of task 1. All right, let's add one more task. Let's call this task 2. This is task 2. And I'm going to mark this one as completed. All right. I'm not sure what's going on here. Actually, you know what? Let's not mark it as completed. Let's make that as part of our editing update. So let's just add this task as is, and we have 2 tasks. All right. So now, what we'll do is we'll delete task 1, and then we'll edit task 2, and finally delete task 2. So let's delete task 1. Again, let's click on cancel first to see if that works. All right, good. So nothing happened. We still have 2 tasks. Let's click on delete again. Let's delete. Now we have just 1 task. And if I click on edit of task 2, let's just update this and say subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon. Cheap plug, guys. Make sure you've done that. And guys, I'm going to be launching a Patreon soon. So, stay tuned for that. I'll launch a video when that Patreon is ready. So that way you guys can hopefully support the channel. And let's just say, thanks for joining me on this journey, for example. Am I spelling that correctly? Journey. Here you go. All right, I'm just gonna mark this. I'm just gonna mark this as complete and save. And now we have the badge. The badge looks a little ugly because the title is very long, and so generally you would probably increase the width of this container, or you could probably decrease the font size to fix this, but I'm not going to fix this for now. This is just a demonstration. So cool. So that looks like that's working. And then finally, if I were to delete and click that, boom, we have no more task left. All right, so guys, I mean, that pretty much concludes this entire course. And hopefully you were able to learn lots about the Django framework. It's very, very powerful. It allows you to do rapid development. You can definitely build full-scale enterprise-level applications with it. You can build small projects with it. The world is your oyster with Django, and I've used it for many different projects. Definitely use the Django REST framework a lot to build my own APIs, and that's something that I'm thinking about releasing a future video on. So please like this video, subscribe, and add some comments below if you want to see that video. And that's pretty much concludes this, guys. Thank you for joining me on this video. Until next time, happy coding.